The night Celine Vale walked into Cassian Reeves' study to sign a contract that would save her life, she didn't know she was signing her soul away to the most dangerous man in New York. 18 months. No love, no escape, just survival beside a crippled kingpin whose enemies would kill her just to watch him bleed. This is a story about debt, desperation, and a marriage built on lies that became the most terrifying truth either of them ever faced. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. You're not ready for what happens next. Celine's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs in the back of the black sedan, trying to still the tremor, but it crawled up her wrists anyway. Outside the tinted windows, the city blurred past, Manhattan giving way to suburbs, then estates hidden behind iron gates and old money. The driver hadn't spoken since picking her up outside her studio apartment in Brooklyn 3 hours ago. He just drove, eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. She didn't know what kind of people Cassian Reeve employed, but she imagined they were the kind who didn't ask questions and didn't leave witnesses. Her phone buzzed. Another creditor. She didn't even look. The car turned onto a private road that wound through dense forest, trees so thick they blocked out the late afternoon sun. Celine felt her chest tighten. This was it. The point of no return. She could still tell the driver to turn around. She could still run. Disappear. Change her name. Move to some town in the Midwest where no one knew her face or her failures. Except she couldn't. The lawsuits alone would follow her anywhere. The criminal charges her former business partner had left her holding, those were federal. You didn't outrun federal charges with a new name and a bus ticket. The estate appeared through the trees like something out of a Gothic novel. Stone, iron, shadows pooled in every corner despite the daylight. Reeve Manor sat on 50 acres of land north of the city, isolated enough that screams wouldn't carry. Celine swallowed hard. She hated that her mind went there, but everything she'd heard about Cassian Reeves suggested screams were part of his business model. The car stopped in front of massive wooden doors. The driver got out, opened her door, and gestured toward the entrance without a word. Celine stepped onto gravel, her boots crunching too loud in the silence. The air smelled like rain and old earth. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low and threatening. The front doors opened before she reached them. A woman stood in the threshold, mid-50s, silver hair pulled back tight, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral. Her expression gave away nothing. "Miss Vale?" the woman said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Yes. Follow me." The interior of Reeve Manor was colder than the outside. High ceilings, dark wood, paintings that looked expensive and joyless. Celine's footsteps echoed as she followed the woman down a hallway lined with closed doors. She wanted to ask where they were going, but the woman's posture suggested she didn't entertain questions. They stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. The woman knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for a response. "Miss Vale is here, sir." A voice from inside, low and controlled. "Send her in." The woman stepped aside. Celine walked through the door and heard it close behind her with a finality that made her stomach drop. The study was huge, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace that could fit a grown man, leather chairs that looked older than her entire bloodline. And behind a massive oak desk, backlit by the last gray light coming through the window, sat Cassian Reeve. He wasn't what she expected. She'd seen photos. Grainy, always from a distance, usually taken by journalists who didn't want to get too close. But in person, he was sharper, harder. A man in his late 30s with silver creeping into his dark hair and a face carved from stone and sleepless nights. His eyes were the worst part. Gray, cold, the kind of eyes that saw straight through you and calculated your worth in seconds. He was in a wheelchair. Celine had known that, but seeing it was different. The chair was sleek, expensive, custom-built. His hands rested on the armrests, strong hands, scarred knuckles. He looked like a man who'd survived something that should have killed him and decided to make the world pay for it. "Sit," Cassian said. It wasn't a request. Celine sat in the chair across from him, keeping her spine straight, her face neutral. She'd practiced this. Don't show fear, don't show weakness. Men like him fed on that. Cassian studied her for a long moment. Not leering, assessing. Like she was a piece of architecture he was deciding whether to demolish or renovate. "You're younger than I expected," he said finally. "You're exactly what I expected," Celine shot back before she could stop herself. His eyebrow lifted a fraction. "And what's that?" "Terrifying." A pause. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. More like the memory of one. "Good," Cassian said. "Fear keeps you honest." He reached for a folder on the desk and slid it across to her. Thick. Official looking. The kind of document that came with lawyers and consequences. "Read it," he said. Celine opened the folder. The first page was a marriage contract. The second page was a financial agreement. The third was a list of terms that made her hands start shaking again. 18 months, public appearances as his wife, complete loyalty. No romantic entanglements outside the marriage, no questions about his business. In exchange, all her debts erased, her firm rebuilt under his legitimate corporate umbrella, legal protection from the criminal charges her partner had left her drowning in. Celine read it twice, her mind racing. This wasn't a marriage. This was indentured servitude with a ring. "Why me?" she asked, looking up. Cassian leaned back in his wheelchair, his fingers steepled. "Because you're desperate. Because you're smart. Because you have nothing left to lose, which makes you predictable. And because I need a wife who understands this is a transaction, not a fairy tale." "Why do you need a wife at all?" "That's not your concern." "It is if I'm signing my life away." His eyes narrowed. "You're signing 18 months away, not your life. Unless you make it your life by doing something stupid." Celine felt anger flare in her chest, hot and reckless. "You mean like asking questions you don't want to answer?" Cassian's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them, dangerous, electric. "You have a spine," he said quietly. "That's good. You'll need it. But don't mistake honesty for permission to test me. I'm offering you survival. Take it or leave it. I don't care which." Liar, Celine thought. If he didn't care, she wouldn't be here. She looked back down at the contract. The terms were brutal, but they were clear. No ambiguity. No hidden clauses. Everything laid out in black ink like a man who'd learned the hard way that assumptions got people killed. "What happens after 18 months?" she asked. "We divorce." Quietly. "You walk away with everything I promised. I walk away with what I need." "Which is?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "Legitimacy." That one word carried more weight than the entire contract. Celine understood then. This wasn't about love or companionship or even basic human connection. This was about power, perception. A man who ruled the underworld but needed a respectable face to interface with the parts of society that wouldn't do business with a known criminal. She was that face. "If I sign," Celine said slowly, "I'm not just your wife. I'm your shield. Yes. Which means your enemies become my enemies. Yes. And if they come for me?" Cassian's eyes went flat. "Then they learn why crossing me is the last mistake they ever make." It should have sounded like a threat. Instead, it sounded like a promise. The kind of promise a man like him kept. Celine picked up the pen sitting on top of the contract. Her whole life had been about building things, designing structures that would last, creating beauty out of concrete and steel. And then one man, her partner, her friend, someone she'd trusted, had burned it all down and left her holding the ashes. She had two choices now: drown in those ashes or build something new from them, even if that something was a lie. Celine signed her name at the bottom of the contract, fast, before she could change her mind. Cassian took the folder back, glanced at her signature, then locked it in a drawer of his desk. "You'll move in tomorrow," he said. "My people will handle the logistics. Bring what you need. Everything else will be provided." "What about my apartment?" "Keep it if you want. You won't have time to go back." Celine stood, her legs unsteady. "Anything else I should know?" Cassian looked at her for a long moment. "Yes. Once you walk into this house as my wife, you don't walk out unless I say so. Not for 18 months, not for any reason. Do you understand?" Her throat went dry. "That sounds like a prison." "It's protection." "Feels the same from where I'm standing." Cassian's expression didn't soften. "Then get used to the feeling. Because starting tomorrow, Celine Vale doesn't exist anymore. Only Celine Reeve, my wife, my responsibility, my problem. He wheeled himself toward the door, moving with the kind of controlled precision that suggested years of practice. He paused at the threshold and looked back at her. "One more thing," he said. "Don't fall in love with me. It won't end well for either of us." Then he was gone, leaving Celine standing alone in the study with the echo of his warning still hanging in the air. Chisam. The wedding was a spectacle designed to send a message. It happened 3 days later in the private garden of Reeve Manor, under a white canopy strung with lights that looked romantic from a distance but felt clinical up close. There were no guests, no families, just witnesses, lawyers, a judge Cassian clearly had in his pocket, and a photographer who worked fast and said nothing. Celine wore a dress that had been delivered to her new bedroom the night before. White, elegant, expensive. It fit her perfectly, which meant someone had taken her measurements without asking. That should have bothered her more than it did, but she was running out of things to be bothered by. Cassian wore a black suit that made him look like he was attending a funeral instead of a wedding. Maybe he was. Maybe they both were. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes. Celine said, "I do," because the contract required it. Cassian said, "I do," because he needed her to believe this was real. The judge pronounced them married. The photographer took pictures that would be sent to every media outlet in New York by morning. And when Cassian leaned in to kiss her, brief, controlled, performative, Celine felt nothing except the cold press of his mouth against hers and the weight of the ring now locked around her finger. It was done. Celine Reeve, wife of the most dangerous man in the city. The real nightmare started that night. Living in Reeve Manor was like living inside a held breath. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat. Celine's bedroom was on the second floor, down the hall from Cassian's suite. Separate rooms. Separate lives. The marriage was for show, and Cassian made it clear from the beginning that he had no interest in blurring those lines. Fine by her. She spent the first week exploring the estate like a prisoner mapping her cell. 50 acres of land. Gardens she wasn't allowed to walk in alone. A garage full of cars she wasn't allowed to drive. Security cameras in every hallway. Guards stationed at every entrance. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress. And she was locked inside it. The staff moved through the house like ghosts. The woman who'd greeted her that first day, Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper, ran the estate with military efficiency. Meals appeared on schedule. Laundry was done without being asked. Celine's movements were tracked without being questioned, but no one talked to her. No one looked her in the eye. It was like being invisible and hyper-visible at the same time. Cassian was worse. He appeared at breakfast every morning, punctual, controlled, reading through documents while he ate. He acknowledged her with a nod, sometimes a single word. Then he disappeared into his office for the rest of the day. She'd hear him on phone calls through the walls, low, clipped conversations in languages she didn't recognize, sometimes raised voices, sometimes long stretches of silence that felt more dangerous than the shouting. At night, she'd hear him moving through the house, the soft whir of his wheelchair, the creak of old floorboards. Once she heard him in the library at 3 a.m, glass clinking, the sound of something heavy being set down too hard. She didn't go check on him. That wasn't part of the contract. But 2 weeks into the marriage, everything changed. Celine was in the study, her study now, technically, though it still felt like trespassing, working on designs for a project Cassian had dropped in her lap without explanation. He told her to rebuild her firm, so she was. Slowly, carefully, using the resources he'd promised and trying not to think too hard about where the money came from. She was sketching elevations when the door opened. Cassian wheeled himself in without knocking. He looked worse than usual, pale, tense. His left hand was trembling slightly, a tremor he tried to hide by gripping the armrest. "We have an event tomorrow night," he said without preamble. "A fundraiser. Politicians, judges, people who matter. You'll be there." Celine set down her pencil. "I thought public appearances were scheduled in advance." "They are. This one just got moved up." "Why?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "Because someone made a move I didn't anticipate. and now I need to remind them who they're dealing with. And I'm part of that reminder. You're my wife. You're the whole point. Celine leaned back in her chair, studying him. He looked exhausted, not just physically, but bone deep. The kind of tired that came from years of fighting battles no one else could see. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Cassian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Stand beside me. Look like you belong there. Don't flinch when people say terrible things to your face." "What kind of terrible things?" "The kind designed to make me look weak." Celine felt something sharp twist in her chest. Not sympathy, not quite, but something close. "Do you have a dress for me?" she asked. "Or do I get to pick this time?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Mrs. Brennan already laid one out. Black, understated. "You'll look like you married me for power, not money." "Isn't that the truth?" Cassian held her gaze. "No. You married me because you were drowning and I threw you a rope. Don't rewrite history to make yourself feel better about it." Celine's breath caught. He was right, and she hated him for it. "Anything else?" she asked coldly. "Yes. Tomorrow night, you're not just my wife, you're my equal. Act like it. These people will smell fear from across the room. If they think you're a victim, they'll use you against me. And if they use you against me..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The fundraiser was held at a private estate in the Hamptons. Old money, older secrets, the kind of place where senators and mobsters shook hands under crystal chandeliers and pretended they weren't all playing the same game. Celine stood beside Cassian in the entrance hall, her hand resting lightly on the back of his wheelchair, and felt every eye in the room turn toward them. The dress Mrs. Brennan had chosen was perfect. Black silk, long sleeves, a neckline that suggested elegance without desperation. Celine had pulled her dark hair back into a low twist, minimal jewelry, makeup understated. She looked like exactly what Cassian needed her to be, a woman who belonged in this world, even if she didn't. They moved through the crowd slowly. Cassian knew everyone, introduced her to judges, councilmen, businessmen whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. Celine shook hands, made polite conversation, played the role she'd been hired for. And then she saw him. Matteo Sarconi. He was younger than Cassian, early 30s, tailored suit, the kind of face that magazines would call handsome and women would call dangerous. He moved through the room like he owned it, and maybe he did. The Sarconi family controlled half the waterfront and most of the drug trade coming through the ports. Cassian's competitor, his enemy. Matteo's eyes locked on Celine from across the room, and she felt her stomach turn. "He's going to approach us," Cassian said quietly beside her. "When he does, don't engage. Let me handle it." "What's he going to do?" "Test us." Matteo cut through the crowd with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. He stopped in front of them, his smile sharp. "Cassian," he said, "congratulations on the wedding. I was disappointed not to receive an invitation." "It was intimate," Cassian replied evenly. "Family only." Matteo's smile widened. "Of course. And this must be the beautiful Celine. I've heard so much about you." He reached for her hand. Selena hesitated, then extended it. Matteo took it and held on too long. His thumb brushed against her knuckles. His eyes stayed locked on hers. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away. Instead, she smiled. "Funny," Celine said, her voice calm. "I haven't heard anything about you." Matteo's expression flickered. Just for a second. Then he laughed. "Cassian, your wife has a sharp tongue. You should teach her when to use it." Cassian's face remained neutral, but Celine felt the shift in him, the barely controlled rage simmering just beneath the surface. "My wife," Cassian said softly, "doesn't need me to teach her anything. She's smarter than both of us combined." Matteo finally released her hand. "We'll see." He walked away, and Celine exhaled slowly. "You did well," Cassian murmured. "He's going to come after me, isn't he?" "Yes." "And you're going to let him?" Cassian looked up at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something raw in his eyes. "No," he said. "I'm going to destroy him." They left the fundraiser an hour later. The ride back to the estate was silent. Celine stared out the window, her mind racing. She'd handled Matteo, but barely. And if he was just the beginning, if there were more men like him waiting to test her, to use her, to break her just to hurt Cassian, she didn't know if she was strong enough for this. When they arrived home, Cassian didn't go to his office. He followed her to the study instead. Celine turned to face him. What? You're afraid, Cassian said. I'm not. Don't lie to me. I can see it. Celine's hands curled into fists. Fine. I'm afraid. Happy? You put me in a room full of predators and told me not to bleed. What did you expect? Cassian wheeled himself closer. I expected exactly what you did. You held your ground. You didn't break. That's more than most people can say. Most people aren't married to you. No, they're not. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box, set it on the desk between them. Celine stared at it. What is that? A gift. Open it. She hesitated, then picked up the box. Inside was a thin silver bracelet, simple, elegant, but when she looked closer, she saw the inscription on the inside. You are not alone. Celine's throat tightened. I'm not good at this, Cassian said quietly, at making people feel safe. But you are safe here, Celine. As long as you're my wife, no one touches you, no one hurts you, and anyone who tries— He stopped, swallowed hard. Anyone who tries will answer to me. Celine looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Loneliness. This man who ruled the underworld, who terrified senators and mobsters alike, was so profoundly alone that he'd bought a wife just to have someone stand beside him, and somehow that made him human. Thank you, Celine said softly. Cassian nodded once, then turned to leave, but at the door he paused. Celine. Yes? Don't fall in love with me. He said it again, a warning, a plea. And then he was gone. Celine stood in the study, the bracelet still in her hand, and realized with growing horror that it might already be too late. The bracelet sat on Celine's nightstand for 3 days before she put it on. She'd pick it up every morning, turn it over in her fingers, read the inscription until the words blurred together. You are not alone. It felt like a lie and a lifeline at the same time. Cassian Reeve didn't do sentiment. He did strategy. Everything he gave her came with a purpose, and she couldn't figure out what this one was. So she left it there, catching the morning light, reminding her of a promise she didn't ask for from a man who didn't make promises. Until the 4th morning, when she woke up to shouting. Celine sat up fast, heart hammering. The sound came from downstairs, Cassian's voice, low and vicious, cutting through someone else's desperate explanations. She grabbed her robe and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Don't care what excuse you have. I care about results, and right now you're giving me nothing but problems. A younger voice, shaking. Sir, I swear the shipment was secured. Someone tipped them off. We don't know who. Then find out. You have 24 hours. If you don't have a name by then, you become the name I give them. Silence. Then footsteps. Fast. Running. Celine stepped back from the door, her hands cold. She'd heard Cassian angry before. Clipped. Controlled. The kind of anger that came with surgical precision. But this was different. This was rage barely leashed, and it scared her more than anything he'd done so far. She should stay in her room, mind her business. That was the smart play. Instead, she pulled on the bracelet, tied her robe, and went downstairs. Mike. Cassian was in his office, the door half open. Celine could see him through the gap, sitting behind his desk, head in his hands, shoulders tight with tension. The early morning light cut across his face, making the shadows under his eyes look like bruises. She knocked softly. His head snapped up. For a second, his expression was raw, exhausted, furious, something close to desperation. Then the mask slammed back into place. What are you doing up? He asked. I heard shouting. Go back to bed. Celine pushed the door open wider. Are you okay? Cassian's laugh was sharp and humorless. Do I look okay? You look like you're about to put someone in the ground. Maybe I am. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Cassian watched her with wary eyes, like she was a variable he hadn't accounted for. What happened? Celine asked. Nothing that concerns you. Cassian? I said it doesn't concern you. His voice was hard. Final. You're my wife, not my partner. Stay in your lane. The words hit like a slap. Celine felt heat rise in her chest. Anger, humiliation, something uglier she couldn't name. She'd spent weeks playing the perfect wife, standing beside him at events, smiling through veiled threats and backhanded compliments. And this was what she got. Dismissal. Like she was just another piece of furniture in his carefully controlled world. "Fine," she said coldly. "I'll stay in my lane. But when your enemies figure out I'm not actually loyal to you, don't act surprised when they use me to tear you apart." She turned to leave. "Wait." Celine stopped, her hand on the door. Cassian exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry. That was—" He paused, searching for words. "That was unfair." "Yes, it was. Sit down, please." Celine turned back. Cassian looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. She sat in the chair across from him, arms crossed, waiting. "Someone inside my organization is feeding information to the Sarkonis," Cassian said quietly. "They knew about a shipment that was supposed to be untraceable. Intercepted it before my people could move it. That's the third time this month. You have a mole." "Yes." "Do you know who?" "If I knew, they'd already be dead." Celine processed that. "What was in the shipment?" Cassian's eyes narrowed. "Why do you want to know?" "Because if I'm going to be collateral damage in your war, I'd like to know what I'm dying for." He studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he answered, "Medicine. The legitimate kind. My companies supply half the hospitals on the East Coast. That shipment was worth $2 million in antibiotics and antivirals. The Sarkonis stole it, and now they're going to sell it back to me at triple the price or let people die waiting for supplies that won't come." Celine felt something cold settle in her stomach. "That's evil?" "Yes. Welcome to my world, Celine. This is what I'm fighting. This is why I need legitimacy. Because the moment I can operate entirely above board, bastards like Matteo Sarconi lose their leverage. And until then? Until then, I play their game and try not to drown in the blood." The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "I want to help," Celine said. Cassian shook his head. "No." "Why not? I'm an architect. I solve problems. I see patterns. Maybe I can—" "You're not built for this," Cassian interrupted. "You're not built for the kind of thinking that gets people killed, and I won't let you become that. You don't get to decide what I'm built for." "Yes, I do. That's the whole point of this marriage. I make the hard calls so you don't have to." Celine leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You're not protecting me, Cassian. You're isolating me. There's a difference." His jaw tightened. "Is there?" "Yes. Protection keeps me safe. Isolation makes me useless. And if I'm useless, I'm a liability. Isn't that what you said? Liabilities get people killed." Cassian stared at her, and Celine saw the exact moment he realized she was right. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "Let me look at your business operations, the legitimate ones. If someone's leaking information, they're leaving a trail. I can help you find it. You're an architect, not an investigator. I design systems, buildings, organizations, supply chains. They're all the same. Find the weakness in the structure and the whole thing falls apart. Let me look." Cassian was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into a drawer, pulled out a thick file, and slid it across the desk. "This is everything," he said. "Shipping routes, suppliers, warehouse locations, personnel files. If you find something, you bring it to me. No one else. Do you understand?" Celine took the file. "I understand. And Celine?" She looked up. "If this gets you hurt," Cassian said softly, "I'll never forgive myself." Celine spent the next week buried in spreadsheets and supply chain manifests, cross-referencing shipping schedules against personnel records, mapping routes on printouts spread across the study floor. She worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and stubborn determination, while Cassian disappeared into meetings and phone calls that always ended with him looking more exhausted than before. They barely spoke, but every morning there was fresh coffee waiting in the study. Every night the fire was already lit when she came down to work. Small things, quiet things, the kind of gestures that didn't require words. On the 8th day, Celine found it. A pattern, subtle, almost invisible. But there, every intercepted shipment had gone through the same distribution hub in Newark. different drivers, different routes, but the same hub. And the manager of that hub, a man named Vincent Cardoza, had been with Cassian's organization for 12 years, trusted, unremarkable, perfect. Celine checked his financials. Nothing unusual. Then she checked his family connections. And there it was. Vincent Cardoza's sister was married to a low-level enforcer in the Sarconi family. Celine's heart started pounding. She grabbed the file and went looking for Cassian. She found him in the library, sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look up when she entered. "I found your mole," Celine said. Cassian's head turned slowly. "Who?" "Vincent Cardoza, distribution manager, Newark Hub. His sister's married to a Sarconi enforcer. He's been feeding them intel for months, maybe longer." She handed him the file. Cassian read through it, his expression unreadable. Then he set it down, picked up his phone, and made a call. "It's me," he said when someone answered. "Vincent Cardoza. I want him in the North Warehouse in 2 hours, alive, alone." He hung up. Celine's stomach twisted. "What are you going to do?" "What needs to be done?" "Cassian, don't." His voice was flat. "You asked to help. You helped. Now let me handle the rest." "You're going to kill him." "Yes." The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Celine felt her breath catch. She'd known, logically, what kind of man Cassian was, but knowing and witnessing were different things. And now she was complicit. She'd handed him the name. She'd signed the death warrant. "I need air," she said, her voice shaking. She turned and walked out of the library, down the hallway, through the front doors and into the cold night. Her hands were trembling. Her chest felt too tight. She made it to the edge of the driveway before she bent over, hands on her knees, trying not to be sick. Behind her, the soft whir of Cassian's wheelchair. "Celine." She didn't turn around. "You don't have to watch," Cassian said quietly. "You don't have to know the details. That's why I keep you separate from this part of my life." "I'm not separate anymore," Celine said, straightening. "I found him. I gave you his name. That makes me part of this." "No, it makes you smart. What I do with the information makes me a killer. There's a difference." Celine turned to face him. "Is there? Because right now it feels like we're both covered in blood." Cassian's expression was unreadable. "You want absolution? I can't give you that. You want permission to walk away? You have it. Go back inside. Pretend you never found anything. Let me carry this alone." "I don't want absolution," Celine said. "I want to understand how you live with it, how you make these calls and still sleep at night." "I don't," Cassian said simply. "Sleep, I mean. I haven't slept through the night in 6 years, not since the bullets that put me in this chair also killed the last person I ever allowed myself to care about." The confession hit like a punch. Celine stared at him. "Who?" "Her name was Claire, my sister. She was 23. She got caught in the crossfire during a power struggle I should have seen coming. I was in the hospital for 8 months. When I woke up, she was already buried." His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "So no, Celine, I don't sleep. I don't forgive myself. I just survive. And I make sure that every bastard who put me here pays for it in ways they can't even imagine." Celine felt tears burn her eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It's not your burden." "Then whose is it?" Cassian looked at her for a long moment. "Mine. Only mine. That's the whole point." He turned his wheelchair around and headed back toward the house. Celine stood in the driveway, watching him disappear into the darkness, and realized she'd just seen the truth beneath the armor. Cassian Reeve wasn't a monster. He was a man who'd turned himself into one because grief and guilt had burned away everything else. She didn't go back inside. Instead, Celine walked the grounds, following the gravel paths through gardens she'd never explored, past hedges trimmed into geometric perfection, under trees older than the estate itself. The air was cold and sharp, and it helped clear her head. When she finally came back to the house an hour later, Cassian was gone. Mrs. Brennan found her in the hallway. "Mr. Reeve had business to attend to," the housekeeper said carefully. "He won't be back until late." "I know what kind of business," Celine said. Mrs. Brennan's expression didn't change. Then you also know not to wait up. Cassian came home at 4 in the morning. Celine heard the car pull up, heard the front door open and close, heard the elevator that carried him to the second floor. She was still awake, sitting in bed with a book she wasn't reading, waiting. She didn't know why she was waiting. Maybe because some part of her needed to see him, needed to know he'd come back. That the man who'd confessed his grief to her in the driveway was still the same man who'd left to commit murder. Her door opened without a knock. Cassian wheeled himself inside and Celine's breath caught. He looked like hell, pale, exhausted. His shirt had blood on the cuff. Not much, just a smear, but enough. His hands were clean, though. Someone had made sure of that. "You're still awake," he said. "So are you." "I told you, I don't sleep." Celine set her book aside. "Is it done?" "Yes." "Do I want to know the details?" "No." She nodded. "Okay." Cassian studied her. "You're not going to ask if I feel guilty? If it was worth it? Would you answer honestly if I did?" "Probably not." "Then why waste the breath?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like relief. "You should hate me," Cassian said quietly. "Maybe I should," Celine agreed, "but I don't." "Why not?" She thought about it, really thought about it. "Because you're honest," she said finally. "You told me exactly who you were from the beginning. You never lied. You never pretended to be something you're not. And in a world full of people who smile while they stab you in the back, that's worth something." Cassian's jaw tightened. "You're giving me too much credit." "Maybe. Or maybe you don't give yourself enough." He looked away. "You should go to sleep." "So should you." "I told you." "I know. You don't sleep, but maybe tonight you could try." Cassian met her eyes, and for a moment Celine saw something vulnerable flicker across his face. Fear. Loneliness. Hope. Then it was gone. "Good night, Celine," he said. He left before she could respond. Celine sat in the dark, listening to the sound of his wheelchair moving down the hallway, and wondered when exactly she'd stopped being afraid of him and started being afraid for him. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated normalcy. Cassian threw himself into legitimate business with renewed focus. Celine's architecture firm began taking on real clients. Small projects at first, then larger ones, prestigious commissions that came with Reeve money backing them. She hired a small team, rented office space in Manhattan, started building something real. At night, they had dinner together. Not always, but more often than before. They talked about safe things, architecture, politics, books. Cassian had read more than she expected, philosophy, history, novels she'd loved in college. He had opinions, sharp ones. They argued about Hemingway and Morrison and whether brutalist architecture was visionary or just ugly. Celine found herself laughing, actually laughing. And Cassian smiled, not the cold, controlled expressions he wore for the world. Real smiles, small, fleeting, but real. It felt dangerous. Because somewhere between the late-night conversations and the shared silences, Celine realized she was starting to see him as something other than her captor or her employer. She was starting to see him as a man, a deeply flawed, deeply wounded man who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. And she wanted in. That terrified her more than anything the Sarkonis could do. The first crack in their fragile peace came at a gallery opening in Tribeca. It was supposed to be low-key, an art exhibition benefiting some charity Cassian's legitimate companies supported. Celine wore emerald green. Cassian wore his usual black. They moved through the crowd like they'd done this 100 times before. Until Matteo Sarconi showed up. Celine saw him first. He was across the room talking to a woman in red, but his eyes kept drifting toward them, calculating, waiting. "He's here," she murmured to Cassian. "I know." "What do we do?" "Nothing. Let him come to us. He will." Cassian was right. 10 minutes later, Matteo cut through the crowd with a drink in each hand. He offered one to Celine. "Champagne," he said, "for the beautiful Mrs. Reeve." Celine didn't take it. I'm not thirsty. Pity. Mateo's smile didn't reach his eyes. I was hoping we could have a conversation. Just the two of us. Cassian's voice was ice. She's not interested. I wasn't talking to you, Cassian. Mateo's gaze stayed locked on Celine. I was talking to your wife. Or does she need permission to speak? Celine felt every muscle in her body tense. This was it. The test. The moment Mateo tried to drive a wedge between them in public, make Cassian look controlling, make her look powerless. She could play it safe. Defer to Cassian. Let him handle it. Or she could do what she'd been hired to do. Celine took the champagne from Mateo's hand, met his eyes, and smiled. You're right, she said. I don't need permission. So here's what I'll tell you, Mateo. I'm not interested in conversations with men who mistake basic courtesy for an opening. I'm not interested in games disguised as friendships. And I'm especially not interested in whatever sad little power play you're attempting here. She handed the glass back to him. Now, if you'll excuse us, my husband and I have actual people to talk to. Mateo's expression went cold. Careful, Mrs. Reeve. You're making enemies you can't afford. No, Celine said quietly. I'm making it clear that I already chose my side. You should do the same. She turned and walked away, Cassian beside her, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. When they were out of earshot, Cassian spoke. That was reckless. That was necessary. He's going to retaliate. Good. Let him. At least now he knows where I stand. Cassian was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, low, almost disbelieving. You're insane, he said. I learned from the best. The retaliation came 2 days later. Celine was at her office in Manhattan, reviewing blueprints with her lead designer when her assistant knocked on the door. Miss Vale, Mrs. Reeve, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. Celine frowned. Who? He says his name is Detective Marcus Chen. He's with the NYPD. Everything inside Celine went cold. She sent her designer out, waited until the door closed, then nodded to her assistant. Send him in. Detective Chen was mid-40s, tired eyes, rumpled suit. He sat across from her desk without being invited and pulled out a notebook. Mrs. Reeve, he said, thank you for seeing me. I don't think I had much choice. Everyone has choices. He flipped open the notebook. I'm investigating a missing persons case. Vincent Cardoza, distribution manager for Reeve Logistics. He disappeared 3 weeks ago. His family's worried. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Celine kept her face neutral. Why would I? Because right before he vanished, there was a significant audit of his department. Unusual activity flagged. Your name was on some of the reports. Her stomach dropped. I work with my husband's companies. I review operations. That's not unusual. No, but Vincent Cardoza disappearing right after you flagged his department? That's a hell of a coincidence. Celine leaned back in her chair. Detective, if you're accusing me of something, I suggest you do it clearly. Otherwise, this conversation is over. Chen smiled, not friendly. I'm not accusing you of anything, Mrs. Reeve. I'm just letting you know that people are watching. Your husband's business dealings. Your sudden rise from bankrupt architect to powerful executive. The bodies that seem to pile up around the Reeve family. Bodies? Celine's voice was sharp. What bodies? Vincent Cardoza, for one. Once we find him. You haven't found him yet. No, but we will. And when we do, I wonder whose fingerprints we'll find all over his disappearance. Celine stood. This meeting is over. If you want to talk to me again, go through my lawyer. Chen stood slowly, pocketing his notebook. One more thing, Mrs. Reeve. Your husband is very good at making problems disappear. But you? You're new to this world. New people make mistakes, and mistakes leave evidence. He left, and Celine sat back down, her hands shaking. She'd known this could happen, but knowing and experiencing were different things. She pulled out her phone and called Cassian. He answered on the first ring. What's wrong? We need to talk, Celine said. Now. Cassian met her at the estate an hour later. She told him everything, Chen's visit, the questions about Vincent, the thinly veiled threats. When she finished, Cassian was silent for a long time. Then he said, This is Mateo. How do you know? Because Chen's been on the Sarconi payroll for years. He's dirty, and now Mateo's using him to come after you. Celine felt cold seep into her bones. What do we do? I handle it. How? Cassian's expression went hard. You don't need to know. Yes, I do. I'm the one he questioned. I'm the one whose name is in those reports. I need to know how deep this goes. Cassian wheeled himself closer. Listen to me. The moment you know the details, you become complicit in ways you can't take back. Right now, you have plausible deniability. You didn't know what happened to Vincent. You were just doing your job. That's your protection. Don't throw it away. I'm already complicit, Cassian. I found Vincent. I gave you his name. That makes me part of this, whether you want to admit it or not. No, it makes you my wife. There's a difference. Not to the NYPD. Cassian's jaw tightened. Then I'll make sure they never have a reason to come after you again. How? By giving them someone else to focus on. Celine's blood went cold. What does that mean? But Cassian was already moving toward the door, his phone in his hand, his face set in grim determination. Cassian, stay here, he ordered. Don't talk to anyone. Don't go back to your office. Don't leave this estate until I tell you it's safe. You can't just lock me up. Yes, I can. That's the deal, Celine, remember? You do what I say, you stay safe. That's how this works. He left before she could argue. Celine stood alone in the study, fury and fear warring inside her chest, and realized with sickening clarity that Cassian wasn't protecting her. He was preparing to sacrifice himself, and she couldn't let that happen. Waltz. She waited until midnight. Then Celine went to Cassian's office and started searching. She didn't know what she was looking for. Evidence. Leverage. Something she could use to stop him from doing whatever reckless, self-destructive thing he was planning. She went through files, opened locked drawers with a letter opener, pulled up documents on his computer using passwords she'd watched him type over their shoulders during late-night work sessions. And then she found it, a file labeled Philadelphia. Inside were meeting notes, transcripts, recordings, evidence of Cassian negotiating with federal prosecutors, offering testimony against the Sarconi family in exchange for immunity, not for himself, for her. Celine's hands started shaking as she read through the documents. Cassian had been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. He was going to turn state's witness, expose decades of Sarconi operations, and put himself in the crosshairs of every criminal family on the East Coast, all to protect her from a murder investigation she'd helped create. The office door opened. Cassian wheeled himself in, saw her standing at his desk with the Philadelphia file in her hands, and went very still. You shouldn't have found that, he said quietly. You're going to get yourself killed, Celine said, her voice shaking. Maybe. Cassian, it's the only way, Celine. If I testify, the feds will protect you, give you immunity, make this whole thing disappear. You walk away clean. You rebuild your life. You forget this ever happened. I don't want to walk away. The words echoed in the silent office. Cassian stared at her. What? Celine set the file down, her chest heaving. I don't want to walk away, Cassian. I don't want immunity or protection or a clean slate. I want... She stopped, swallowed hard. I want you, she said finally, alive. Here. Not buried in some federal protection program or dead because you decided I was worth more than your own survival. Cassian's face went pale. Celine, I love you, you idiot, she said, tears streaming down her face. I don't know when it happened or how, but I do. I love you. And if you throw your life away to save mine, I will never forgive you. The silence was deafening. Then Cassian moved, fast. He crossed the room, grabbed her hand, and pulled her down until she was kneeling in front of his wheelchair, eye level with him, close enough to see the wetness in his eyes. You can't love me, he said hoarsely. I told you not to, I don't care what you told me. I love you anyway. I'm a killer, Celine. I've done things. I know. I don't care. You should care. You should run. You should... Celine kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and messy, and tasted like tears and years of loneliness finally breaking open. Cassian froze for half a second, then kissed her back like a drowning man finding air. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Cassian pressed his forehead against hers. This is a mistake, he whispered. Probably. You're going to get hurt. I'm already hurt. At least this way I'm hurt because I chose it. Cassian pulled back just enough to look at her. I can't protect you from myself, Celine. I don't know how. Then don't, she said. Just love me back. That's all I need. I don't know if I can. Try. Cassian closed his eyes, his hands still wrapped around hers. I've loved you since the gallery, he said finally, his voice raw. When you destroyed Matteo in front of everyone and I realized you weren't afraid of me anymore. You were afraid for me. No one's been afraid for me in 6 years. Celine's breath hitched. Then why didn't you say something? Because love makes you weak, and I can't afford weakness. Not in this world. What if love makes you stronger? Then I'm already dead. Before Celine could respond, Cassian's phone rang. He answered it, his expression shifting from vulnerable to lethal in seconds. When? He asked. Pause. Where? Another pause. Lock down the estate. No one in or out. He hung up and looked at Celine, his face pale. What happened? She asked. Matteo Sarconi just declared open war. He hit 3 of my warehouses simultaneously, killed 8 of my people, and he left a message. What message? Cassian's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. He said the next target is you. The estate went into lockdown within minutes. Celine watched from Cassian's office window as armed men materialized from shadows she didn't know existed, taking positions along the perimeter wall, on the roof, at every entrance. Floodlights blazed to life, turning the grounds into a stage where violence waited in the wings. The entire property transformed from a home into a fortress, and she realized with cold clarity that this had always been its true purpose. Cassian was on 3 phones at once, barking orders in a voice she'd never heard before. Pure command, no hesitation, the voice of a man who'd orchestrated wars from a wheelchair and won every single one. But his left hand trembled against the armrest, and she could see the pain creeping into his shoulders, the tension that would leave him immobile by morning if this didn't end soon. How many do we have on site? He demanded into one phone. Pause. That's not enough. Pull everyone from the Brooklyn operations. I don't care about the shipments. Let them burn. I need bodies here. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. It's me. I'm calling in the favor you owe me. All of it. Tonight. Celine stood frozen by the window, her mind racing. This was real. Matteo Sarconi had declared war and she was the target. Not Cassian's businesses, not his empire. Her. When Cassian finally set down the phones, his face was ashen. How long do we have? Celine asked, her voice surprisingly steady. I don't know. Hours? Maybe less. He wheeled himself closer, his eyes searching hers. There's a safe room in the basement. Reinforced steel. Separate ventilation system. Supplies for 2 weeks. You're going down there now. What about you? I'll be coordinating from here. Cassian, this isn't a negotiation, Celine. You're going into that room and you're staying there until I personally come get you. Do you understand? She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wouldn't hide while he put himself in the line of fire, but the look on his face stopped her. This wasn't the cold kingpin who'd offered her a contract. This was a man terrified of losing the only thing he'd allowed himself to care about in 6 years. Okay, she said quietly. Relief flashed across his features. Mrs. Brennan will take you down. Go, now. Celine moved toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Cassian? He looked up. Don't die, she said. His jaw tightened. I don't plan to. Promise me. Celine, promise me you won't trade your life for mine. Promise me you'll fight to survive this, for both of us. Cassian held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. I promise. It felt like a lie. But Celine took it anyway, because it was all she had. The safe room was exactly what Cassian had described, a steel box buried beneath the wine cellar, accessed through a hidden panel that Mrs. Brennan opened with a key she wore around her neck. The housekeeper's face was impassive as always, but Celine caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to the ceiling like she could hear death approaching through the floorboards. Everything you need is inside, Mrs. Brennan said. Food, water, medical supplies, communications equipment. Mr. Reeve will come for you when it's safe. What if he can't? Celine asked. Mrs. Brennan's expression flickered, just for a second. Then I will. She closed the door, and Celine heard locks engage, heavy, mechanical, final. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 12. One narrow bed, a desk with monitors showing security feeds from around the estate, shelves stocked with enough supplies to survive a siege, a single chair bolted to the floor, a very expensive coffin. Celine sat at the desk and pulled up the security feeds, her hands shaking. She could see the front gates, the driveway, the main entrance. Men in tactical gear moving with military precision. Cassian's people. She recognized some of them from the household staff. The quiet gardener who always nodded at her in the mornings was now carrying an assault rifle with the ease of someone who'd done this before. How had she not seen it? How had she lived here for months and never realized she was surrounded by soldiers disguised as servants? One of the monitors showed Cassian's office. He was still there, phone pressed to his ear, his face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. Even through the grainy feed, she could see the exhaustion carved into every line of his body. She wanted to be up there with him, wanted to stand beside him the way she'd promised. Instead, she was locked in a steel box while he prepared to die protecting her. The minutes crawled past. Celine watched the feeds obsessively, her eyes burning from the screens. Nothing moved outside. No cars. No shadows. Just stillness that felt like held breath. Then, at 2:47 a.m., the front gate exploded. The blast lit up every monitor simultaneously. White light, then fire, then smoke billowing thick and black. Celine's heart stopped. She couldn't hear the explosion from down here, but she felt it. A tremor that ran through the foundation of the estate like the earth itself was screaming. On the screens, chaos erupted. Men poured through the destroyed gate, dozens of them, maybe more, moving in coordinated teams. Cassian's people opened fire from defensive positions, and suddenly the grounds became a war zone, muzzle flashes, bodies dropping, blood on the gravel driveway. Celine's hands flew to her mouth, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't a criminal turf war. This was an execution. She switched to the feed showing Cassian's office. He was on his feet. No, not on his feet, leaning against the desk, phone still at his ear, barking orders while watching his own security monitors. His left leg buckled, and he caught himself on the edge of the desk, pain flashing across his face. "Get down," Celine whispered to the screen. "Please get down." As if he'd heard her, Cassian lowered himself back into his wheelchair. But he didn't retreat. He stayed at the desk, coordinating, directing his people like a general who refused to abandon the battlefield. The attackers reached the house. Gunfire echoed through the feeds. She couldn't hear it, but she saw windows shattering, saw Cassian's men falling back to secondary positions inside. The estate was being overrun, and then the power cut. All the monitors went black. Celine sat in total darkness, her breathing loud in her ears. Emergency lights kicked on after 5 seconds, dim red bulbs that barely pushed back the shadows. The monitors rebooted slowly, one by one. When Cassian's office feed came back online, the room was empty. Celine's blood turned to ice. Where was he? Had he evacuated? Was he hurt? Dead? She scanned the other feeds frantically. The library, empty. The kitchen. 2 of Cassian's men using it as a fallback position, wounded, bleeding. The main hallway. There. Cassian was in his wheelchair, moving down the hallway toward the west wing, 2 guards flanking him. He was heading for the safe room, coming for her, just like he'd promised. Relief flooded through Celine so violently she almost sobbed. But then another group appeared on the feed, attackers, 6 of them, cutting through from the east corridor. They'd flank Cassian in seconds. "No," Celine breathed. "No, no, no." She watched helplessly as Cassian's guards saw the threat, took positions, opened fire. One attacker went down, then another. But there were too many. One of Cassian's guards took a round to the chest, crumpled. The second guard fell a moment later. Cassian was alone in the hallway. The remaining attackers advanced slowly, weapons raised. Cassian reached into his jacket, pulled out a gun. When had he started carrying a gun? And fired 3 shots. 2 attackers dropped. But the last 2 were too close now, and Cassian's hand was shaking, the tremor she'd noticed weeks ago now magnified by adrenaline and pain. He fired again, missed. The attackers were on him. One kicked the gun from his hand. The other grabbed the wheelchair and slammed it against the wall. Cassian's head snapped back, and Selene saw blood. She was screaming, she realized distantly. Screaming at monitors that couldn't hear her, beating her fists against the steel door, trapped while the man she loved was being murdered 20 feet above her head. Then a new figure appeared on the feed. Matteo Sarconi. He walked into frame like he owned the place, flanked by 2 more guards, dressed in an expensive suit that hadn't been touched by the violence consuming the estate. He looked down at Cassian, said something Selene couldn't hear, then smiled. It was the smile that broke her. Selene turned to the communications equipment Cassian had mentioned, found a radio, keyed the microphone. "Cassian," she said, her voice breaking. "Cassian, can you hear me?" No response. "Cassian, please." Static. Then a voice. Not Cassian's. "Mrs. Reeve, Matteo's voice, smooth and poison. "I'm so glad you're listening. I want you to hear what happens next." "Don't touch him," Selene said, her voice shaking with rage. "Don't you fucking touch him." "Or what? You'll come save him? Go ahead, I'll wait." He knew where she was. He knew she was locked in a room she couldn't escape. And he was going to make her listen while he killed Cassian. "What do you want?" Selene demanded. "You want me? Fine. Let him go and You'll what? Trade yourself? How noble." Matteo's laugh was cruel. "But I don't want you, Mrs. Reeve. I never did. I want him to suffer. And the best way to make Cassian Reeve suffer is to destroy everything he loves while he watches." On the monitor, one of Matteo's men grabbed Cassian by the hair, forced his head up. Matteo crouched down to Cassian's level, said something. Cassian spat blood in his face. Matteo backhanded him so hard Cassian's wheelchair tipped. "Stop!" Selene screamed into the radio. "Stop it! I'll give you anything. Money, territory, information." "I don't need anything from you," Matteo said calmly. "I have everything I want. Your husband's empire is burning. His people are dying, and soon he will too. Then I'll come down to that little steel box you're hiding in, and we'll have a conversation about what happens to widows in my organization." The radio cut to static. Selene stared at the monitors, her whole body shaking. She had to do something. Had to get out. Had to... The door locks disengaged with a heavy clunk. Selene spun around. The steel door swung open. Mrs. Brennan stood in the threshold, her face grim. "Come with me," the housekeeper said. "Now." "I can't leave him." "You can't help him from down here. But there's another way out, a tunnel. It leads to the garage. Mr. Reeve's orders were to evacuate you if the estate was compromised." "I'm not running." "Then you're dying. Is that what you want? To die here while Matteo..." Mrs. Brennan's voice cracked just slightly. "Mr. Reeve is buying you time with his life. Don't waste it." Selene looked back at the monitors. Cassian was on the floor now, blood pooling beneath him. Matteo was saying something, gesturing, clearly enjoying himself. Every instinct screamed at her to run to him. But Mrs. Brennan was right. She'd just be another hostage. Another weapon Matteo could use against Cassian. "Where's the tunnel?" Selene asked. "Oh shit." They moved fast through the basement, Mrs. Brennan leading the way with a flashlight. The sounds of fighting were muffled down here, but still audible. Gunfire, shouting, something heavy crashing overhead. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a wine rack that swung aside on oiled hinges, revealing a narrow passage carved through raw earth and reinforced with timber supports that looked decades old. "This was built during Prohibition," Mrs. Brennan said, handing Selene the flashlight. "It comes out in the garage. There's a car waiting, keys in the ignition. Drive until you're out of the county, then call this number." She pressed a card into Selene's hand. "They'll get you somewhere safe." "Who are they?" "People Mr. Reeve trusts more than he trusts himself." Selene looked at the card. "Just a phone number. No name." "What about you?" "I'm going back up. Someone needs to make sure Matteo doesn't get what he wants." "What does he want?" Mrs. Brennan's expression was unreadable. "To break Mr. Reeve completely. That only works if you die. So you don't die. Understand?" Before Selene could respond, an explosion rocked the house above them. Dust rained from the ceiling. The lights flickered. "Go," Mrs. Brennan ordered. "Now." Celine ran into the tunnel. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders. The flashlight beam bounced wildly as she moved, illuminating dirt walls, wooden supports, the occasional rat scurrying away from the light. The air was thick and stale. Her breathing echoed back at her. She'd gone maybe 100 yards when she heard voices behind her, shouting. In the basement, they'd found the tunnel. Celine broke into a sprint, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. The tunnel seemed endless. How far was the garage? 200 yards? 300? She'd lost all sense of distance. Footsteps behind her now, multiple people, running. The tunnel opened into a concrete chamber, the garage's underground level. A black Mercedes sat waiting, just like Mrs. Brennan had said. Celine yanked open the door, threw herself inside, jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, she saw them, 3 men, emerging from the tunnel, weapons raised. Celine slammed the car into drive and floored it. The garage door was closed. She had maybe 3 seconds to make a choice, stop and try to open it, or she aimed for the door and accelerated. The Mercedes hit the garage door at 40 miles per hour. Metal shrieked, glass exploded. The door tore off its tracks and the car burst through into the night, fishtailing on gravel before Celine wrestled it back under control. Gunfire erupted behind her. The back window shattered. Celine ducked instinctively, kept her foot on the gas, and drove blind for 3 seconds before risking a look. The estate was behind her, burning. Flames licked from broken windows. Smoke poured into the sky. It looked like the end of the world. She'd left Cassian in there. The thought hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she nearly stopped the car, nearly turned around. Then she remembered his promise. Don't trade your life for mine. She kept driving. Celine made it 15 miles before she had to pull over and vomit on the side of the road. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cassian on the floor, saw Mateo standing over him, saw the blood spreading across marble floors she'd walked across every morning for months. He was dead. He had to be dead. No one survived what she'd seen, but she couldn't think about that. Not yet. Not if she wanted to survive the next hour. Celine pulled out the card Mrs. Brennan had given her. Just a phone number. She used the car's built-in phone to dial. A woman answered on the first ring. Identification. I don't have... Mrs. Brennan told me to call this number. I'm Celine Reeve. A pause. Location? I don't know. Route 87, maybe? Heading south? I left the estate. We know. Stay on the line. Don't hang up. Don't stop driving. Who are you? Someone who works for your husband. You're being tracked. We're scrambling the signal, but you need to keep moving. Get to Interstate 95 and head toward Philadelphia. There's a safe house waiting. Is Cassian alive? Silence. Is he alive? Celine demanded, her voice breaking. We don't know, the woman said finally. Communications went dark 20 minutes ago. We're trying to reestablish contact, but the line cut out. Celine stared at the phone, tried redialing. Nothing, just dead air. She was alone. She drove for another hour, following signs toward I-95, her mind numb with shock and exhaustion. The sun was starting to rise when she finally saw the city lights of Philadelphia in the distance. That's when she noticed the car following her. Black SUV, tinted windows. Keeping pace 3 car lengths back, matching her speed exactly. Celine's pulse spiked. She accelerated. The SUV accelerated. She changed lanes. The SUV changed lanes. They'd found her. Celine floored it, the Mercedes' engine screaming as she wove through early morning traffic. The SUV stayed with her. She took an exit at random, tires squealing, barely making the turn. The SUV was right behind her. She was heading into the city now. Narrow streets, traffic lights, pedestrians starting their morning routines. She couldn't outrun them here. Couldn't. The SUV pulled alongside her. The passenger window rolled down. Celine braced for gunfire. Instead, a familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Reeve, pull over!" She looked. Mrs. Brennan sat in the passenger seat, her face streaked with soot and blood, but alive. Alive. Celine nearly sobbed with relief. She pulled over. The SUV stopped behind her. Mrs. Brennan got out and approached the Mercedes, moving stiffly like every step hurt. "You're alive," Celine breathed. "Barely." Mrs. Brennan opened the driver's door. "Shay, get in the SUV. We need to move." This car has a tracker. That's how Mateo's people will find you. Celine scrambled out of the Mercedes and into the SUV. The driver was someone she didn't recognize. Military bearing, scarred hands, eyes that had seen too much. He pulled back into traffic the moment her door closed. "Where's Cassian?" Celine asked. "Is he alive?" Mrs. Brennan said. "Last I saw, but he's in bad shape. Mateo has him." The world tilted. "What?" "Mateo took him. Hostage. He's using him as leverage to flush out the rest of Mr. Reeve's organization. Anyone who tries to help will be killed, along with Mr. Reeve himself." Celine couldn't breathe. "Then why aren't we... We have to go back. We can't," Mrs. Brennan said flatly. "Going back is exactly what Mateo wants. He's waiting for you specifically, Mrs. Reeve. He knows Mr. Reeve will do anything to keep you safe. The moment you show up, he has all the leverage he needs to destroy everything." "I don't care about leverage. Cassian is being kept alive because you're still free," Mrs. Brennan interrupted. "The second Mateo has you both, Mr. Reeve becomes disposable. Right now, you're the only reason he's still breathing." Celine wanted to scream, wanted to shatter something. Instead, she forced herself to think, to calculate, the way Cassian had taught her. "What are our options?" she asked. Mrs. Brennan pulled out a phone. "I made contact with some of Mr. Reeve's allies, people who owe him, people who hate the Sarkonis more than they fear them. They're willing to move, but they need something from you first." "What?" "Proof that you're worth saving, that you're not just some civilian who stumbled into this world, that you understand what's at stake and you're willing to do what's necessary." Celine's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" Mrs. Brennan met her eyes. "It means you need to make a choice, Mrs. Reeve. You can run. Take the money Mr. Reeve set aside for you. Disappear. Start over somewhere far from here. Live a long, safe life knowing you survived. Or you can become exactly what Matteo Sarconi fears most. A woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from his destruction." The SUV's engine hummed in the silence. Celine thought about the contract she'd signed all those months ago. The 18 months that had somehow become a lifetime. The man who'd offered her salvation and then made the fatal mistake of teaching her how to fight. She thought about Cassian bleeding on cold marble floors while Matteo Sarconi smiled. "What do I need to do?" Celine asked. Mrs. Brennan handed her the phone. On the screen was a photograph of a man she didn't recognize. 50s, expensive suit, cold eyes. "His name is Vincent Ortega," Mrs. Brennan said. "He's Mateo's accountant. Handles all the Sarconi family's financial operations. Money laundering, shell companies, offshore accounts, everything. He's untouchable because he's too valuable and too careful. And he has a weakness. A daughter, 15 years old, lives with her mother in Connecticut, completely separate from his business. Mateo doesn't know she exists. Vincent has kept her hidden for years." Celine's stomach turned. "You want me to threaten a child? I want you to make Vincent understand that his daughter's safety depends on his cooperation. We need access to the Sarconi financial records, bank accounts, properties, everything. That information is the only leverage powerful enough to force Mateo into a trade. Cassian for the accounts. Yes. Mateo will never agree to that. He will if the alternative is losing everything. His money, his empire, his reputation. Vincent's records will expose every family member, every business partner, every judge and politician on his payroll. Mateo will have to choose between saving his organization and saving his pride." Celine stared at the phone, at Vincent Ortega's photograph, at the terrible choice she was being asked to make. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I become exactly like them, like Mateo, like everyone I've been fighting against." "Yes," Mrs. Brennan said simply. "And if I don't?" "Then Cassian dies, and Matteo Sarconi owns this city for the next 20 years. The SUV turned onto a quiet street lined with row houses. Dawn light spilled over rooftops, painting everything gold. Somewhere in that light, people were waking up to normal lives, making coffee, getting ready for work, completely unaware that a war was being fought in the shadows of their city. Celine had wanted a normal life once, had built a career, made plans, believed the world operated on logic and fairness and hard work. That woman was dead. She died the night Celine signed Cassian Reeve's contract. What remained was something harder, sharper, something that understood the world didn't run on fairness. It ran on power and fear and the willingness to do things that kept you awake at night. Cassian had tried to protect her from becoming this, but he'd failed. Because the moment she'd fallen in love with him, the moment she'd chosen to stay instead of run, she'd already made her choice. Now she just had to live with it. "Where's Vincent Ortega right now?" Celine asked. Mrs. Brennan allowed herself a small, grim smile. "His daughter has a soccer game this morning. Ridgefield, Connecticut. 90 minutes from here. He never misses a game." Celine looked down at her hands. They'd stopped shaking. That should have scared her more than it did. "Then we should get moving," she said. "We don't want to be late." Shalak. They arrived at the soccer field just as the game was starting. Vincent Ortega stood on the sidelines with other parents, hands in his pockets, watching his daughter play midfielder with the focused intensity of someone who'd built a career on paying attention to details. He looked exactly like his photograph. Unremarkable, forgettable. The kind of man who disappeared into crowds because that's what kept him alive. Celine walked straight toward him. She'd changed clothes at a rest stop. Jeans, dark jacket, hair pulled back. She looked like any other parent there to watch the game, except for her eyes. Her eyes had gone somewhere cold and distant. Mrs. Brennan and the driver stayed in the SUV, watching from across the parking lot. Backup if things went wrong. Witnesses if they went worse. Celine stopped beside Vincent, her gaze on the field. "Your daughter's very good," she said conversationally. "Number 7, right?" Vincent glanced at her, polite but wary. "Thank you. Do I know you?" "No, but you're going to." His expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders tense. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. Your name is Vincent Ortega. You work for Matteo Sarconi. You manage his financial operations. And right now, you're trying to decide whether to scream for help or run." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "I don't. And we both know it." Celine pulled out her phone, showed him a photograph, his daughter's school schedule, her mother's address, the route she took home every day. "I'm not here to hurt your family, Vincent. I'm here to make you an offer." "I don't take offers." "You'll take this one." On the field, his daughter scored a goal. Parents cheered. Vincent's eyes never left Celine's face. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Everything. Every account, every property, every shell company, every name on Matteo's payroll. I want the complete financial architecture of the Sarconi organization, and I want it in the next 6 hours." Vincent's laugh was bitter. "And if I refuse?" "Then Matteo Sarconi finds out about your daughter, about how you've been hiding her for 15 years, about how vulnerable she is, about how easy it would be to—" "Don't!" Vincent's voice was sharp, desperate. "Don't even say it." "Then don't make me," Celine said. "Give me what I want and your daughter stays a secret, stays safe. You have my word." "Your word means nothing. It means more than Matteo's. I'm not asking you to betray him out of loyalty to me. I'm asking you to choose between your daughter and your boss. That's not a choice. That's survival." Vincent looked at this field, at his daughter celebrating with her teammates, at the ordinary, beautiful life he'd somehow managed to build despite the blood on his hands. "If I do this," he said slowly, "Matteo will know it was me. He'll hunt me down, kill me." "Probably," Celine agreed, "but your daughter will be alive, and sometimes that's all we get to save." Vincent was silent for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone, sent a text, waited. 30 seconds later, Celine's phone buzzed. A link, password protected. "That's the access portal," Vincent said quietly. "It's everything you asked for and more. Bank accounts in 7 countries, property holdings, corporate structures, every dirty transaction Matteo's ever made. Use it however you want, but keep your promise, keep her safe." "I will." Vincent looked at her finally, really looked at her. "You're Cassian Reeves' wife. I've seen your picture." "Yes?" "Matteo has him, doesn't he?" "Yes." "Then this is a suicide mission. Even with those files, Matteo won't trade. He'll kill you both and burn the evidence." "Maybe," Celine said. "But at least I'll die fighting. That's more than Cassian will get if I do nothing." Vincent nodded slowly, something like respect flickering across his face. "Good luck, Mrs. Reeve. You're going to need it." He walked away, back to the other parents, back to the game, back to the fragile life he'd built on a foundation of secrets and violence. Celine stood there for another moment watching his daughter play. 15 years old, laughing, alive, unaware that her father had just sacrificed everything to keep her that way. She wondered if the girl would ever know what her existence had cost. She wondered if it mattered. Then she turned and walked back to the SUV, the weight of Vincent's files heavy in her pocket, heavier still in her conscience. Mrs. Brennan looked up when she got in. "Did you get it?" "Yes." "And?" "And I need to make a call to Matteo Sarconi right now." The driver handed her a burner phone. Celine dialed the number Mrs. Brennan provided. Matteo answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Reeve," he said, sounding almost pleased. "I was beginning to think you didn't care about your husband." "I'm done running," Celine said, her voice cold and steady. "You want me? You can have me. But first we're going to talk terms. I don't negotiate with, you will with me. Because I have something you want more than revenge. I have every financial record your organization has ever generated. Every account, every shell company, every name. And if I don't walk out of this alive, those records go to the FBI, the IRS, the press, everyone." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "You're bluffing." "Am I? Check your encrypted email. Vincent Ortega just sent you a very interesting message." She could hear typing in the background, then a sharp intake of breath. How did you? "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that right now I control your entire empire. Every dollar you've ever made, every politician you've ever bought, every crime you've ever committed, it's all sitting on a server with my name on it. And if anything happens to me or my husband, it all goes public. You lose everything." "I'll kill him anyway," Matteo said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'll cut him apart while you listen. Then you lose your empire and I lose my husband. We both end up destroyed. Is that what you want, or would you rather make a deal that lets us both survive?" Another long silence. "What kind of deal?" Matteo asked finally. "Cash-in for the files, clean trade, he walks out alive, and I give you back control of your accounts. You leave us alone. We leave you alone. Everyone goes back to their corners." "Why would I trust you to keep that bargain?" "Because I'm not stupid enough to go to war with you without leverage, and because you know that if I wanted to destroy you, I could have already released those files. I'm offering you a way out that doesn't end with both of us in prison or dead. Take it." Matteo was quiet for so long she thought he might have hung up. Then, "When and where?" "Tonight, midnight, the old shipping warehouse on Pier 17. You bring cash in, I bring the access codes. We make the exchange and this ends." "If you're lying, I'm not." "But Matteo, if you try to double-cross me, if you hurt him before that exchange, if you so much as hesitate, those files go live instantly. Understand?" "I understand." The line went dead. Celine set down the phone, her hand shaking again now that the adrenaline was fading. Mrs. Brennan stared at her. That was either brilliant or insane. Probably both. "You know he's going to try to kill you anyway, the moment he has those codes." "I know. So what's the plan?" Celine looked out the window at the soccer field, at the normal families living normal lives, at the world she'd lost the moment she signed Cassian's contract. "The plan," she said quietly, "is to make sure that when Matteo Sarconi tries to kill me, he's the one who doesn't walk away." They had 12 hours to prepare for a confrontation that would either save Cassian's life or end both of theirs. Celine spent the first 2 hours in a warehouse on the outskirts of Philadelphia that Mrs. Brennan's people had secured, empty except for folding tables, burner phones, and enough weapons to start a small war. The driver, whose name she still didn't know, turned out to be former Special Forces, and he walked her through the basics with the grim patience of someone who'd taught desperate people how to survive before. "You ever fire a gun?" he asked, setting a Glock 19 on the table between them. "No." "Good. Means you don't have bad habits to unlearn." He picked up the weapon, checked the chamber, then demonstrated the grip. 2 hands, firm but not rigid, arms extended, front sight focus. Squeeze the trigger, don't pull. The gun's going to kick. Let it. Don't fight it. Celine took the gun. It was heavier than she expected and colder. The weight of it felt wrong in her hands, like she was holding something that didn't belong to her. "I'm an architect," she said quietly. I build things. I don't destroy them. The driver's expression didn't change. Tonight you're going to do both. Now aim at that target and show me what you've got. She fired 6 rounds, missed the target completely 4 times. The other 2 hit the outer edge, nowhere near center mass. Again, the driver said. She fired until her hands ached, until the smell of gunpowder made her nauseous, until she could at least hit the target consistently, even if her grouping was terrible. It'll have to do, the driver said finally. You're not going to outshoot Mateo's people anyway. The gun's just there to buy you seconds. Use them wisely. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway. We have a problem. Celine set down the gun. What kind of problem? Mateo's moving the meeting, not Pier 17. Says it's too exposed. He wants neutral ground, somewhere he controls. Where? The old Mercy Hospital, abandoned since the 90s, north side. He owns the property through a shell company. It's a maze inside, 6 floors, multiple wings, dozens of rooms. Perfect place for an ambush. Celine's stomach dropped. So he's planning to kill us. Of course he is. The question is whether we're smart enough to kill him first. How many men will he bring? Unknown. Could be 10, could be 50. We won't know until we're inside. And how many do we have? Mrs. Brennan's expression was grim. 4, including you. I called in everyone who owed Mr. Reeve favors. Most of them are too afraid of the Sarkonis to move. The ones who aren't are scattered across 3 states. We couldn't get them here in time. 4 people against Matteo Sarconi's entire organization. The math was impossible. Celine looked at the gun on the table, then at Mrs. Brennan. Tell me the truth. What are our actual chances? Of getting Mr. Reeve out alive? 20%, maybe less. And of getting out alive ourselves? Don't ask questions you don't want answered. Celine sat down hard on a folding chair. Her hands were shaking again. Not from fear, though there was plenty of that, but from exhaustion. She'd been awake for over 30 hours. Her body was running on adrenaline and coffee and the kind of desperate energy that kept people moving long after they should have collapsed. There has to be another way, she said. Some angle we're not seeing. There isn't, Mrs. Brennan said flatly. We have no leverage except the files. No manpower. No time to plan. We're walking into a kill box, and the only reason we're doing it is because the alternative is letting Mr. Reeve die knowing we didn't even try. Celine closed her eyes. Thought about Cassian bleeding on marble floors. Thought about his promise that he'd fight to survive. Thought about the bracelet she still wore on her wrist. You are not alone. She opened her eyes. Then we don't fight fair, Celine said. Matteo expects us to walk in through the front door with our hands up. So we don't. We go in early. We set the trap before he does. We turn his kill box into ours. The driver looked at Mrs. Brennan. I like her. She's insane, Mrs. Brennan said, but there was something like approval in her voice. What did you have in mind, Miss Yates? They arrived at Mercy Hospital at 9 p.m., 3 hours before the scheduled exchange. The building loomed against the night sky like a monument to decay. 6 stories of broken windows, graffitied walls, and structural rot. The main entrance was chained shut, but the driver found a service door on the east side that had been forced open years ago by squatters or scavengers. Inside, the hospital was a tomb. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, casting everything in shades of gray. Old gurneys sat abandoned in hallways. Medical equipment rusted in corners. The walls were covered in peeling paint and black mold. Somewhere deep in the building, water dripped with metronomic persistence. 6 floors, Mrs. Brennan whispered, her voice barely audible. Matteo will want high ground. My guess is he'll set up on the 4th or 5th floor, gives him sight lines on anyone coming up. Then we go to the 6th, Celine said. Above him. Force him to look up instead of down. They moved through the building like ghosts, the driver taking point with a suppressed pistol, Mrs. Brennan covering the rear. The 4th member of their team was a man called Rivera, late 30s, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, eyes that had seen the worst humanity had to offer and survived anyway. He didn't speak, just moved with practiced efficiency, checking corners, marking exits. The stairwell to the 6th floor was half collapsed. They had to climb over rubble and exposed rebar, their breath loud in the enclosed space. By the time they reached the top, Celine's legs were burning and her lungs felt like they were on fire. The sixth floor was worse than the others. The ceiling had partially caved in, leaving gaping holes that opened onto the night sky. Wind howled through the corridors. Debris crunched under their feet no matter how carefully they moved. "Here," the driver said, pointing to a large room that must have been a surgical theater once. "Central location, multiple exits, good sight lines. We can funnel them in if we're smart about it." They spent the next hour setting up. The driver rigged improvised flashbangs from road flares and old oxygen canisters he found in a storage room. Rivera positioned himself in an adjoining corridor with a rifle, an old hunting weapon, but functional. Mrs. Brennan took a position near the stairwell with a shotgun and enough shells to hold off a small army, and Celine stood in the center of the surgical theater with Vincent Ortega's files on a tablet, a pistol tucked into the back of her jeans, and a plan that relied entirely on Matteo Sarconi being predictable. "If this goes wrong," she started to say. "It's already wrong," the driver interrupted. "We're just deciding how wrong before it kills us." Comforting. Wasn't meant to be. At 11:47 p.m., they heard vehicles pulling up outside. Celine's heart started hammering. She moved to a broken window and looked down. 3 black SUVs. Maybe 15 men piling out, all armed, all moving with military precision. And in the middle of them, being hauled from the back of the center vehicle, Cassian. Even from 6 floors up, Celine could see he was in bad shape. He couldn't stand on his own. 2 men dragged him between them, his feet scraping the pavement. His head hung forward. Blood matted his hair. But he was alive. Celine felt something hot and vicious unfurl in her chest. Not hope. Something harder. Rage. She keyed the radio they'd set up. "They're here. 15 visible. Assume more inside the vehicles. Cassian's with them. He's hurt but mobile." Mrs. Brennan's voice crackled back. "Copy. Stick to the plan. Let them come to you." Celine watched Matteo Sarconi emerge from the lead SUV. Even from this distance, she could see the arrogance in his posture, the way he moved like he owned the world and everyone in it. He was about to learn different. Walked. They came up fast. Celine heard them hitting the stairwells. Multiple teams, coordinated, professional. Matteo wasn't taking chances. He was bringing overwhelming force to crush any resistance before it started. She positioned herself behind an overturned surgical table, the tablet visible beside her, the gun hidden at her back. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped sometime in the last hour, replaced by a cold clarity that felt like someone else's emotion borrowed for the night. Footsteps echoed through the 5th floor below. Voices calling out in Italian, the scrape of boots on concrete. Then silence. Celine waited, her breathing controlled, counting seconds. At exactly midnight, Matteo Sarconi walked into the surgical theater. He came alone, or appeared to, though Celine knew there were at least 4 men positioned in the hallway behind him, and probably more scattered throughout the floor. He wore the same expensive suit from the video feeds, now rumpled and stained. His face was flushed with anger, barely held in check. "Mrs. Reeve," he said, his voice echoing in the empty room. "I'm impressed. Most people would have run. You chose to negotiate. That takes courage. Or stupidity." "Maybe both," Celine said, not moving from behind the table. "Where are the access codes?" "Where's my husband?" Matteo smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "He's close. Alive. For now. But his continued survival depends entirely on your cooperation. So let's not play games. Give me the codes. Prove the files are real. Then we talk about exchanges." "No. Bring Cassian here. Let me see him. Then we talk." "You're not in a position to make demands." "Yes, I am. Because right now, those files are set to upload to every major news outlet on the East Coast in exactly," she checked her watch, "43 minutes. The only way to stop that is with a code that only I have. So you can shoot me, but the second I'm dead, your empire burns. Your choice." Matteo's jaw tightened. He pulled out a radio, spoke into it in rapid Italian. 2 minutes later, they dragged Cassian into the room. Celine's breath caught. He looked worse up close. His left eye was swollen shut. Blood crusted his nose and mouth. His shirt was torn and soaked through with more blood. His own, she assumed. But when they hauled him upright, when his one good eye found hers across the room, she saw recognition, clarity, and fury. "Celine," Cassian rasped, "what the hell are you doing here?" Saving your life, she said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. I told you to run. I don't take orders well. You should know that by now. Mateo stepped between them. How touching. Now, the codes. Before I decide this isn't worth the trouble and just kill you both. Celine held up the tablet. They're right here. Complete access. Everything you asked for, but first you let him go. He walks out of here, gets in a car, drives away. Once he's clear, I give you the codes, and I walk out too. Clean trade. And I'm supposed to trust you? No. You're supposed to trust your own self-interest. You want your empire back? This is the only way you get it. Mateo considered this. Then he nodded to his men. They started dragging Cassian toward the door. Wait. Cassian fought against them, his movements weak but desperate. Celine, don't do this. He's going to kill you the second you hand over those codes. I know, Celine said quietly. Then why? Because I love you, you stubborn bastard. And I'm not watching you die when I can do something about it. Cassian's face crumpled. Celine, please, get him out of here, Mateo ordered. They dragged Cassian from the room. His voice echoed down the hallway, shouting her name, shouting at his captors, shouting warnings she couldn't afford to listen to. Then silence. Mateo turned back to Celine, pulling out a gun. The codes, now. Celine set the tablet on the surgical table. They're yours. But, Mateo, you should know something first. What? Vincent Ortega's files weren't the only insurance I took out. Mateo's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that every word we've said in the last 5 minutes has been broadcast live to a secure server. Video, audio, you admitting to kidnapping, to torture, to murder, all of it recorded, all of it time-stamped, all of it ready to go to the feds if I don't enter a code in the next 30 minutes. Mateo's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your phone. I just sent you a link. Watch the playback. Mateo pulled out his phone with shaking hands, pulled up the link. His expression shifted from disbelief to rage in seconds. You manipulative little... I learned from the best, Celine said. You wanted to play games? Congratulations. You just lost. Mateo raised his gun. Celine dove behind the surgical table as he fired. The bullet sparked off metal inches from her head. She rolled, came up with her own gun, fired twice. Both shots went wide, but close enough to make Mateo duck for cover. Then all hell broke loose. The driver's flashbangs detonated in the hallway outside. Blinding light, deafening noise, screams of confusion. Mateo's men came pouring into the surgical theater, and suddenly the room was a war zone. Celine fired until her gun clicked empty, then threw it at the nearest attacker and ran. She made it to the adjoining corridor where Rivera was positioned. He was already firing, controlled 3-round bursts that dropped 2 of Mateo's men before they knew where the shots were coming from. Go! Rivera shouted. Get to the stairwell! Celine ran. Behind her, gunfire echoed like thunder. She heard Mrs. Brennan's shotgun booming from somewhere below, heard men screaming, heard the driver's voice over the radio, calm despite the chaos. 3rd floor is clear, bringing the package up. The package, Cassian. They'd gotten him out. Celine felt relief so intense it almost staggered her. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. Mateo's people were right behind her, and if she didn't keep moving, Rivera's sacrifice would mean nothing. She hit the stairwell at a dead run, taking the steps 3 at a time, her lungs burning. Above her, she could hear footsteps, the driver moving fast, probably carrying Cassian because there was no way he could walk on his own. A hand grabbed her ankle. Celine went down hard, her chin cracking against the concrete steps. Pain exploded through her jaw. She tasted blood. Someone was climbing over her, trying to pin her down, and she recognized him. One of Mateo's lieutenants, the one who'd been at the gallery, the one who'd smiled while his boss threatened her. He wasn't smiling now. Celine drove her elbow into his throat. He choked, loosened his grip, and she twisted free, kicked him in the face. He fell backward down the stairs, tumbling, and she didn't wait to see if he got up. She kept running. 2nd floor, 1st floor. She burst through a fire exit into the night air and nearly ran straight into Mrs. Brennan. Where's the driver? Celine gasped. Vehicle, loading Mr. Reeve. We need to move, now. They ran across the parking lot toward a waiting van. The back doors were open. Inside, the driver was trying to stop Cassian's bleeding with whatever materials he could find. His own shirt, torn into strips, pressure applied to wounds Celine couldn't fully see in the darkness. But Cassian was conscious, looking at her, reaching for her. Celine climbed into the van and grabbed his hand. "You came," Cassian rasped. "You actually came." "Of course I came, you idiot. I told you to run, and I told you I don't take orders well." Despite everything, the blood, the pain, the gunfire still echoing from the hospital behind them, Cassian laughed. It sounded like it hurt. Mrs. Brennan jumped into the driver's seat. "Everyone in? Good. Hold on." The van peeled out of the parking lot just as Mateo's men emerged from the hospital. Bullets sparked off the rear bumper. The back window shattered. But Mrs. Brennan drove like she'd done this before, weaving through side streets, taking corners at speeds that threw everyone in the back against the walls. They'd made it 4 blocks when Celine realized something was wrong. Rivera wasn't with them. "Where's Rivera?" she asked. The driver's expression went flat. "He didn't make it out." "What? No, we have to go back." "He's gone, Mrs. Reeve. Bought us time with his life. Don't make it worthless by getting killed trying to retrieve his body." Celine felt sick. Rivera. A man whose full name she didn't even know. Dead because she'd asked for help. Cassian squeezed her hand. He knew the risks. We all did. That doesn't make it okay. No, it doesn't, but it makes it necessary. The van took another hard turn. Celine could hear sirens in the distance, police, responding to reports of gunfire. By the time they arrived, the hospital would be empty. Mateo's people would disappear like smoke, and there'd be no evidence except bodies and shell casings that would lead nowhere. "Where are we going?" Celine asked. "Safe house," Mrs. Brennan said from the front. "Different from the one before. Mateo doesn't know about it. We'll hole up there until we figure out our next move." "Next move?" Cassian's laugh was bitter. "We just declared war on the Sarconi family. There is no next move. There's just survival, if we're lucky." "Then we get lucky," Celine said. Cassian looked at her, his one good eye searching her face. "You should have run. You should have taken the out I gave you." "I know. So why didn't you?" Celine brushed blood-matted hair from his forehead, her touch gentle despite her shaking hands. "Because for the first time in my life, I found something worth fighting for, and I'll be damned if I let Mateo Sarconi take it from me." Cassian's throat worked. "Celine, don't tell me it was stupid. Don't tell me it was reckless. I know what it was, and I'd do it again. I was going to say thank you." She stared at him. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For being stubborn enough to walk into hell because I was stupid enough to get trapped there. For—" His voice broke. "For loving me when I've done nothing to deserve it." Celine kissed him, carefully, mindful of his injuries, but with enough force to make her point. "You're wrong," she said when they pulled apart. "You've done everything to deserve it. You taught me how to fight, how to survive, how to see the world for what it really is. You didn't rescue me from my old life, Cassian. You showed me I was strong enough to rescue myself. That's worth everything." The van's tires screeched as Mrs. Brennan took another turn. They were out of the city now, heading north on back roads that wound through empty farmland. The sirens had faded behind them. For the first time in hours, Celine allowed herself to breathe. They'd survived. Barely, but survived nonetheless. Asit. The safe house was a hunting cabin 40 miles north of the city, isolated, off-grid, surrounded by dense forest. They arrived just before dawn, the sky turning gray at the edges, birds starting their morning songs like the world wasn't on fire. The driver helped Cassian inside while Mrs. Brennan secured the perimeter. Celine followed them into the cabin, exhaustion finally catching up with her now that the adrenaline was fading. The interior was Spartan. One main room with a wood stove, a small kitchen, 2 bedrooms barely big enough for the beds they contained. But it was warm and dry, and most importantly, safe. The driver laid Cassian on one of the beds and started a proper assessment of his injuries. Celine hovered in the doorway, watching as he cut away Cassian's ruined shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. Bruises everywhere, cuts that would need stitches, burns on his wrists from being tied too long. Broken ribs, probably. Maybe worse. But alive. "How bad?" Cassian asked the driver. "You'll live, but you need a hospital." Can't risk it. Mateo will have people watching every ER in the state. Then you're going to heal slow and hurt like hell. I can stitch the cuts, wrap the ribs, give you something for the pain, but that's the best I can do without proper equipment. Do it. The driver worked methodically while Cassian gritted his teeth against the pain. Celine wanted to help, but she didn't know how, so she just stood there, feeling useless, until Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Reeve, we need to talk. Celine followed her out to the main room. Mrs. Brennan's face was grim. What? Celine asked. I just got word from my contacts in the city. Mateo's putting a bounty out. $2 million, $1 million for you, $1 million for Mr. Reeve, dead or alive. Celine felt the floor tilt beneath her. $2 million? Every criminal organization on the East Coast is going to be hunting you. Every desperate person with a gun and a dream. You're not safe anywhere. So what do? We disappear completely. New identities, new lives. Mr. Reeve has resources stashed for exactly this scenario. We use them. We go underground so deep even Mateo can't find us. And then what? We hide forever? Mrs. Brennan's expression was unreadable. That's the only option that ends with both of you alive. Celine looked toward the bedroom where Cassian was being stitched back together. Thought about everything they'd survived in the last 24 hours. Everything they'd lost. Rivera. The estate. Cassian's empire. Her firm. Every piece of the lives they'd built. All of it gone. Burned away in one night of violence that could have been avoided if she'd just taken the out Cassian had offered. If she'd just run. But she hadn't, and now they were both paying the price. How long do we have before Mateo finds this place? Celine asked. Unknown. Could be days, could be hours. I've covered our tracks, but Mateo has resources too. It's only a matter of time. Then we need to move fast, get new identities, disappear before... The window exploded inward. Celine hit the ground on instinct, her ears ringing from the gunshot. Glass rained down around her. She looked up and saw a hole in the wall where her head had been 2 seconds earlier. Sniper, Mrs. Brennan shouted. Get down! Another shot. Wood splintered. Mrs. Brennan returned fire through the broken window, her face set in grim determination. The driver appeared from the bedroom, Cassian's blood still on his hands, rifle already in position. How many? At least one, maybe more. They're in the tree line. We need to move. This position's compromised. Move where? Celine demanded. We're surrounded by forest. They'll pick us off the second we step outside. Mrs. Brennan grabbed her arm. There's a root cellar under the cabin. It leads to a tunnel that comes out about 50 yards north. We can use it to flank them. What about Cassian? He can't walk. Then we leave him, the driver said flatly. No. Mrs. Reeve, if we stay here, we all die. If we run, there's a chance at least some of us survive. Those are the options. Choose. Celine looked toward the bedroom. Cassian appeared in the doorway, holding a gun, barely upright but conscious. Go, he said. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. You've saved my life twice in one night. I'm not letting you throw yours away because of misplaced loyalty. It's not misplaced. Celine. Cassian's voice was sharp, final. The voice of a man who'd spent years making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. I need you to survive this. I need you to walk out of here and build the life we talked about. The one where we don't spend every day waiting for a bullet. Can you do that for me? Tears burned her eyes. Not without you. Another gunshot, this one closer. They were advancing. You don't have a choice, Cassian said. Mrs. Brennan, get her out. That's an order. Mrs. Brennan grabbed Celine's arm. We're leaving, now! Celine struggled, tried to break free, but Mrs. Brennan was stronger and more desperate. She dragged Celine toward the kitchen, toward a trapdoor she hadn't noticed before, while the driver laid down covering fire. Cassian! Celine screamed. He didn't answer. Mrs. Brennan shoved her down into the darkness of the root cellar. The tunnel was narrow, dirt walls, barely tall enough to crawl through. Celine could hear gunfire above them, could hear the cabin being torn apart by bullets. And she heard Cassian's voice, one last time, distorted by distance and earth. I love you. Remember that. Then Mrs. Brennan was pulling her forward, deeper into the tunnel, away from the man she'd fought so hard to save, and Celine realized with soul-crushing certainty that some battles couldn't be won. Some people couldn't be saved, and sometimes love wasn't enough to keep death at bay. The tunnel smelled like earth and death. Celine crawled through darkness so complete she couldn't see her own hands, following the sound of Mrs. Brennan's breathing ahead of her, her palms scraping against dirt and roots that caught at her clothes like fingers trying to hold her back. Above them, muffled by layers of soil and time, gunfire continued in sporadic bursts that made her flinch every time, imagining bullets tearing through Cassian's body while she crawled away like a coward. She wanted to go back, wanted to claw her way through the earth and die beside him if that's what it took. But Mrs. Brennan kept moving forward with relentless determination, and Celine's body followed even as her mind screamed at her to stop. The tunnel ended abruptly. Mrs. Brennan pushed aside a wooden grate and pulled herself up into cold morning air. Celine emerged behind her, gasping, covered in dirt, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. They were in the forest, 50 yards from the cabin, just like Mrs. Brennan had said. Through the trees, Celine could see smoke rising from where the building was being systematically destroyed by whoever Mateo had sent. "We need to keep moving," Mrs. Brennan said, her voice flat and emotionless. "They'll sweep the area. If we're still here when they do—" "I'm going back," Celine said. No, you're not." "Yes, I am. I didn't come this far to abandon him now." Mrs. Brennan grabbed her shoulders, her grip iron hard. "Listen to me. Mr. Reeve gave you a gift, the gift of survival. He sacrificed himself so you could live. If you throw that away, if you go back there and die, then his sacrifice means nothing. Is that what you want? To make his death worthless?" "He's not dead," Celine said, her voice breaking. "You don't know that he's dead." "Mrs. Reeve—" A gunshot echoed through the forest, closer than before. Then another, different caliber. "Return fire." Someone was still fighting. Celine's heart lurched. She broke free from Mrs. Brennan's grip and ran toward the sound before the housekeeper could stop her. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Brennan curse viciously, then footsteps following. Celine crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had no weapon, no plan, just the desperate, irrational need to see with her own eyes whether Cassian was alive or dead. She broke through the tree line and saw them. 3 men in tactical gear, advancing on the cabin from the north side. One was already down, bleeding out in the dirt. The other 2 were taking cover behind trees, firing methodically at something inside the building. And from the cabin's shattered windows, someone was firing back. Celine's vision tunneled. She saw a piece of broken lumber on the ground, part of the cabin's destroyed porch railing. She picked it up without thinking, her hands wrapping around splintered wood like it was a weapon she'd trained with her whole life. Then she charged. The first man never saw her coming. She swung the lumber like a bat, caught him across the back of the head with every ounce of strength and rage she possessed. He went down hard, his rifle clattering away. The second man spun toward her, weapon rising. Mrs. Brennan shot him twice from the tree line. Center mass. Professional. The man dropped. Celine stood there, chest heaving, still holding the lumber, blood pounding in her ears so loud she could barely hear anything else. Then Cassian's voice, hoarse and disbelieving. "Celine?" She turned. He was in the doorway of the cabin, leaning heavily against the frame, his gun hanging loose in one hand. Blood soaked through the bandages the driver had applied. His face was ghost white, but he was standing, breathing, alive. Celine dropped the lumber and ran to him. She caught him as his legs gave out, taking his weight, even though it nearly drove her to her knees. He was shaking, from blood loss, from pain, from shock, but his arms came around her and held on like she was the only thing anchoring him to the world. "You came back," he rasped against her hair. "You insane, beautiful, reckless. You came back." "Of course I came back, you stubborn bastard." Celine was crying now, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "I told you I don't take orders well." "You're going to get yourself killed." "Then we'll die together. I'm done running, Cassian. I'm done hiding. If Mateo wants us dead, he's going to have to work for it." Cassian pulled back just enough to look at her, his one good eye searching her face. "There's no coming back from this. You understand that? Once we cross this line, once we stop running and start fighting, there's no going back to normal." "Normal died the night I signed your contract," Celine said. "I just didn't know it yet." Behind them, Mrs. Brennan was checking the bodies, securing weapons. We need to leave. Now. More will come. They always do. Where's the driver? Cassian asked. Mrs. Brennan's expression flickered, just for a second. He stayed at the cabin, held them off so we could get you out. He didn't make it. Celine felt the words like a punch. The driver, Rivera. 2 men dead in one night because she'd asked for help. How many more have to die? She asked quietly. As many as it takes, Cassian said. That's the price. That's always been the price. And I'm done asking good people to pay it for me. He straightened, grimacing with pain but forcing his body to obey. Mrs. Brennan, is the car where we left it? Half-mile east, hidden in the drainage culvert. Then that's where we're going. We get to the car, we get out of this county, and then... He paused. Then we end this. One way or another. How? Celine asked. Mateo has an army. We have... what? The 3 of us? We can't win this fight. No, Cassian agreed. Not with violence, but violence isn't the only weapon we have.
They
made it to the car, a nondescript sedan with Connecticut plates and enough cash in the trunk to start a new life somewhere far away. Mrs. Brennan drove while Cassian sat in the back with Celine, his head resting against the window, conserving what little strength he had left. Talk to me, Celine said, keeping her voice low. What's the plan? Cassian was quiet for a long moment, then, You still have Vincent Ortega's files? Yes, backed up on 3 different servers. Why? Because Mateo made a mistake when he declared war on us. He showed weakness. And in our world, weakness is blood in the water. Every rival family, every ambitious underboss, every enemy he's ever made, they're all watching to see how this ends. If we can expose him, if we can prove he's vulnerable, they'll tear him apart, Celine finished. Use his own world against him. Exactly. We don't need to kill Matteo Sarconi. We just need to destroy everything that makes him powerful. His money, his connections, his reputation. Strip all that away and he's just another angry man with a gun. Someone else will put him down for us. It was vicious, calculated. The kind of strategy that required seeing people as chess pieces and being willing to sacrifice them without hesitation. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had made Cassian the most feared man in New York. What do you need from me? Celine asked. Everything you took from Vincent, every file, every account number, every piece of dirty laundry the Sarconi family has been hiding for the last 30 years, we're going to burn it all down. That will destroy more than just Mateo. Innocent people will get caught in the crossfire. Families, businesses, people who had nothing to do with this. I know, Cassian said quietly. And I'm making that choice anyway. Because the alternative is watching you die. And I won't do that. Not for anything. Celine looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd offered her salvation and then taught her how brutal salvation could be. Who'd promised to protect her and then shown her that protection always came with a price. Who loved her enough to burn the world if it meant keeping her safe. Okay, she said, let's burn it down. They spent the next 3 days in a motel outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, paying cash and using fake names that Mrs. Brennan had arranged years ago for exactly this kind of emergency. Cassian slept most of the first day, his body finally giving in to exhaustion and blood loss. Celine sat beside him, watching the shallow rise and fall of his chest, terrified every time he went too still for too long. Mrs. Brennan disappeared for hours at a time, making calls, arranging meetings, pulling in favors from people who owed Cassian more than money. She came back each time with new information, new resources, new pieces of the puzzle they were assembling. On the 3rd day, Cassian was well enough to sit up and work. Celine spread Vincent's files across the motel room's desk, and they went through everything systematically. Bank accounts, shell companies, real estate holdings, evidence of bribes and extortion, and murders that stretched back decades. It was a map of corruption so complete it was almost beautiful in its complexity. This is enough to put away half the eastern seaboard, Celine said, scrolling through transaction records. Judges, senators, police chiefs, all of them on Mateo's payroll. That's the point, Cassian said. We don't just expose Mateo. We expose everyone he's protected. Make them understand that being associated with him is a liability, not an asset. Force them to cut him loose to save themselves. And then what? He'll be arrested? Tried? Cassian's smile was cold. He won't make it to trial. Someone will get to him first. A rival family settling old scores. A desperate politician trying to silence a witness. Maybe even one of his own people trying to save the organization by cutting off the diseased limb. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that Matteo Sarconi will be dead, and we won't have pulled the trigger. It was ruthless, efficient, everything Celine had once despised about this world, and she was helping orchestrate it. I used to design buildings, she said quietly. I used to believe in creating things that would last, that would make the world better. Now she gestured at the files. Now I'm destroying lives. Cassian reached across the desk and took her hand. No, you're destroying a cancer. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I'm becoming exactly what I was running from. Then why are you still here? Celine met his eyes. Because the alternative is letting you fight alone. And I tried that. It didn't take. Celine, I know what I'm doing, Cassian. I know what it costs, and I'm choosing it anyway. Not because I think it's right, but because I think it's necessary. And sometimes those two things don't align the way we'd like them to. Cassian was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand gently. When this is over, if we survive, I want you to know something. The life I promised you, the quiet one, the one where you go back to building instead of destroying, that's still waiting for you. You can still walk away, choose something better. Can you? His silence was answer enough. Then I guess we're both stuck, Celine said. Let's at least make it count. Msat. They released the files on a Friday afternoon. Every major news outlet, every federal agency, every journalist who'd ever written about organized crime, thousands of pages of evidence, meticulously documented, impossible to ignore. Within an hour, the story was everywhere. Within 3 hours, arrest warrants were being issued. Within 6 hours, Matteo Sarconi's world began to collapse. Celine and Cassian watched it happen from the motel room's television, flipping between news channels that were all saying the same thing in different words. The Sarconi criminal empire was finished. Decades of carefully constructed power, gone in an afternoon of revelations. Matteo's face appeared on screen, a photo from some charity gala, him smiling in a tuxedo like he was just another wealthy businessman. The chyron beneath read, alleged mob boss Matteo Sarconi wanted in connection with racketeering, money laundering, multiple homicides. He's going to run, Mrs. Brennan said from the corner where she'd been monitoring police scanners. The moment he realizes he can't buy his way out of this, he'll disappear. Probably has a dozen escape routes planned. Then we need to make sure he doesn't reach any of them, Cassian said. How? We don't know where he is. Cassian pulled out his phone, dialed a number from memory, put it on speaker. Someone answered on the third ring. I was wondering when you'd call. Matteo's voice. Calm, almost amused. Cassian's expression didn't change. You saw the news. Hard to miss. Very thorough. Very destructive. I'm impressed, Cassian. You always did know how to burn things down when you couldn't have them. This ends tonight, Matteo, one way or another. I agree, which is why I'm extending you an invitation. Just you and me, face to face. No armies, no backup, no games. We settle this the old way. Why would I agree to that? Because if you don't, the first thing I do when I disappear is put every resource I have left into hunting down your wife. And I promise you, Cassian, I will find her. I will make her suffer in ways you can't even imagine. And I will make sure you hear every second of it before I kill her. Celine felt ice flood her veins. Cassian's hand tightened on the phone. Name the place. Pier 17, where we were supposed to meet before you got clever. Midnight. Just you. If I see anyone else, if I even suspect a trap, I walk away and the deal's off. I'll be there. Good. Oh, and Cassian, bring your wheelchair. I want you to understand exactly how helpless you are when I put a bullet in your wife's name. The line went dead. Celine stared at the phone. You're not actually going. Yes, I am. It's a trap. He's going to kill you. Probably. Then why? Because he's right, Cassian said quietly. As long as he's alive, you'll never be safe. He'll hunt you forever. The only way this ends is if one of us dies tonight, and I'd rather it be me than you. No, Celine's voice was sharp. No, I didn't survive the last 4 days just to watch you throw your life away on some macho bullshit about honor and sacrifice. We do this together or not at all. Celine, I mean it, Cassian. Either we both go or neither of us does. Choose. Cassian looked at Mrs. Brennan. Give us a minute. The housekeeper left without a word, closing the door behind her. Cassian turned to Celine. You don't understand what you're asking. Yes, I do. I'm asking to stand beside my husband when he faces his enemy, the same way you'd stand beside me. Don't I get that choice? Not when it gets you killed. That's not your decision to make. Yes, it is. I'm your husband. Protecting you is my job. And I'm your wife, which means protecting you is mine. So either we protect each other or we admit this whole marriage thing was always just a transaction and we stop pretending it ever meant anything more. Cassian's face crumpled. It means everything. You mean everything. That's why I can't. Celine crossed the room and kissed him. Hard. Final. Then prove it, she said when they broke apart. Prove I mean everything by trusting me to fight beside you. Not behind you. Not hidden away in some safe room. Beside you. As your equal. The way you promised. Cassian closed his eyes. She could see the war happening behind his eyelids. The part of him that wanted to lock her away somewhere safe, fighting against the part that understood she'd never forgive him if he tried. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. If you die because I allowed this, then you'll grieve and you'll survive. The same way I would if I lost you, but at least we'll have fought together. Isn't that worth something? Cassian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he could shield her from the world through sheer force of will. You're going to be the death of me, he murmured against her hair. Probably, Celine agreed, but at least you'll die loved. They arrived at Pier 17 20 minutes early. The warehouse district was abandoned at this hour. Industrial buildings that had been left to rot when the shipping industry moved to deeper ports further south. Pier 17 itself was a concrete skeleton, half collapsed, open to the elements. Moonlight spilled through gaps in the roof, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Matteo was already there. He stood in the center of the main floor, alone as promised, wearing jeans and a dark jacket instead of his usual expensive suits. He looked diminished somehow. Still dangerous, but no longer untouchable. Just a man with a gun and nothing left to lose. Cassian wheeled himself forward slowly. Celine walked beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. They'd argued about her positioning. He wanted her behind him. She'd insisted on beside, and finally compromised on this. Close enough to support him. Close enough to act if necessary. Close enough to die together if it came to that. You brought her, Matteo said when they were close enough for conversation. I'm surprised. She insisted, Cassian replied. Touching. True love, even in the face of death. Matteo's smile was poisonous. Does she know what you were before you met her, Cassian? Does she know about the people you killed, the lives you destroyed, the empire you built on corpses? She knows enough, Cassian said evenly. Does she? Does she know about Claire? Celine felt Cassian tense beneath her hand. Don't, Cassian said quietly. Don't what? Tell your wife the truth about your sister? About how she died because of your choices? Because of your war with my family? Matteo, it was my brother who gave the order, Matteo continued, his voice rising. But it was your actions that put her in the crossfire. You knew there'd be retaliation. You knew civilians would get hurt. But you made your moves anyway because winning mattered more than protecting the people you loved. Cassian's breathing had gone harsh. That's not... Isn't it? Tell me, Cassian, when you made the deal that started our family's war, when you decided your ambition was worth the risk, did you think about Claire? Did you consider what might happen to her? Every day, Cassian said, his voice breaking. Every single day for 6 years. And yet here you are, making the same choices, dragging another woman into your war, putting her life on the line because you can't walk away from the violence that defines you. Matteo looked at Celine. Run while you can, Mrs. Reeve. He'll get you killed just like he killed his sister. It's what he does. Celine felt Cassian trembling beneath her hand, felt the weight of guilt and grief that had carved him hollow from the inside. And she realized something Matteo didn't understand. You're wrong, she said, stepping forward, away from Cassian, toward Matteo. You think Cassian dragged me into this. Like I'm some victim who didn't know better. But I chose this. Every step, every risk. I chose it because for the first time in my life, I found someone worth fighting for, someone worth dying for if it comes to that. Mateo's eyes narrowed. How noble. And how stupid. Maybe. But at least I'm making my own choices. Can you say the same? Or are you still trying to live up to your brother's legacy? Still fighting wars that should have ended years ago because you're too afraid to figure out who you are without the violence? You don't know anything about me. I know you put a $2 million bounty on our heads. I know you burned down Cassian's estate and killed his people. I know you tortured him for information he didn't have. And I know... She took another step closer. I know you're alone. No family backing you anymore. No empire. Just you and whatever pride you have left. And that's why you're here. Not because you want revenge, but because you have nowhere else to go. Mateo's hand moved toward the gun at his waist. I wouldn't, said a voice from the shadows. Mrs. Brennan stepped into view, rifle raised and aimed at Mateo's center mass. Behind her, two more figures emerged. Men Celine didn't recognize, but who carried themselves with the same lethal competence. Mateo froze. You said no backup. I lied, Cassian said simply. The same way you would have. The same way you probably have people positioned outside right now waiting for their chance to shoot me. So what now? You kill me? Make me disappear? That's not going to fix anything. I'm not the only one who wants you dead. No, Cassian agreed. But you're the one who started this war, and I'm the one ending it. He pulled a gun from beneath his jacket, aimed it at Mateo with a hand that barely shook, despite everything he'd been through. Wait, Celine said. Everyone looked at her. She turned to Cassian. Don't. Celine, if you kill him, you prove him right. You prove that violence is the only answer you know. That you're exactly what he said, someone who destroys everything he touches. He tried to kill you. He killed my people. He deserves... Maybe he does. But do you deserve to be the one who delivers that justice? Do you deserve to carry one more death on your conscience when you're already drowning in them? Cassian's hand was shaking now. Not from weakness, from restraint. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to choose a different path. To be the man who walks away. Who lets the system handle this instead of handling it yourself. The system won't touch him. You know that. Men like Mateo buy their way out of anything. Not this time. Not with everything we released. Every agency in the country is looking for him. Every family he ever wronged is hunting him. He's finished, Cassian. He just doesn't know it yet. She turned to Mateo. You have two choices. You can try to fight your way out of here and die on this pier. Or you can run, disappear, find somewhere far away and spend whatever life you have left looking over your shoulder. Mateo laughed bitterly. That's not a choice. That's a slow death. It's the only mercy you're going to get from us. Mateo looked between them, at Celine standing defiant, at Cassian still aiming a gun at his chest, at Mrs. Brennan and her people blocking every exit. Then slowly he raised his hands. I want to make a deal, he said. They sat across from each other in the ruins of the pier, Cassian and Mateo, separated by 10 feet and 6 years of bloodshed. Celine stood behind Cassian, her hand on his shoulder, while Mrs. Brennan and her people maintained a perimeter. You have 5 minutes, Cassian said. Talk. Mateo leaned forward, his hands still raised where everyone could see them. You want this war to end. So do I. Not because I'm beaten, don't mistake my position for weakness, but because continuing it serves neither of us. I'm listening. I disappear, permanently, leave the country, surrender all claims to territory, assets, operations. The Sarconi name exits the business entirely. In exchange, you call off your dogs. Stop releasing information. Stop turning my allies against me. Let me go. Why would I do that? Because if I go down, I take everyone with me. Every family, every organization, every dirty secret I know about your operations too, Cassian. You think you're clean because you've been playing legitimate businessman? I have evidence that says otherwise. Evidence that puts you in prison right next to me. Cassian's expression didn't change. Show me. Mateo pulled out his phone slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. Pulled up a file. Slid the phone across the concrete floor. Cassian picked it up. Read. His face went pale. Where did you get this? Doesn't matter. What matters is I have it. And if I don't check in every 12 hours, it gets released automatically. Same system you used against me. Mutually assured destruction. Celine looked at the phone over Cassian's shoulder. Transaction records. Offshore accounts. Evidence of crimes that predated their marriage, stretching back to when Cassian was still building his empire through methods he'd never told her about. Evidence that would destroy him as thoroughly as Vincent's files had destroyed Matteo. So we're at a stalemate, Cassian said finally. We are, which is why I'm proposing detente. You let me go. I let you live. We both walk away from this with our freedom intact. And the bounty on our heads? Cancelled the moment I leave the country. I'll even provide documentation of the cancellation, proof that anyone who comes after you does so without my sanction. Cassian set the phone down. I don't trust you. You don't have to. You just have to recognize that we're both out of moves. The only question is whether we destroy each other out of spite or walk away and survive. The silence stretched. Celine could feel Cassian's indecision radiating through her hand on his shoulder. Every instinct he'd honed over a lifetime of violence was screaming at him to take the shot, to end the threat permanently. But she'd asked him to choose a different path, and he was trying. She could feel him trying. 48 hours, Cassian said finally. You have 48 hours to leave the country. If I see you, hear from you, or find evidence you're operating anywhere on this continent, the deal's off, and I release everything I have. Understood? Matteo nodded slowly. Understood. And Matteo, if you ever come back, I won't. You have my word. Your word means nothing to me, but your self-interest does. So remember this. The moment you set foot on American soil again, you become a dead man. Not because I'll kill you, but because every enemy you've ever made will know you're vulnerable, and they'll tear you apart before you can take 3 steps. Matteo stood slowly, his hands still raised, back toward the exit. At the doorway, he paused. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm sorry about your sister, about Claire. That wasn't supposed to happen. Cassian's hand tightened on the armrest of his wheelchair. Get out, before I change my mind. Matteo left. They listened to his footsteps fade, then the sound of a car starting, then nothing. Mrs. Brennan lowered her rifle. He'll be back. Men like him always come back. Maybe, Cassian said, but not for a long time, and by then, we'll be ready. He looked up at Celine. Or we'll be gone, living somewhere he can't find us, building the life I promised you. Celine knelt beside his wheelchair so they were eye level. You kept your promise. You survived. That's all I asked for. I almost didn't. If you hadn't come back, but I did. And you're here, and we're alive. That's enough. Cassian cupped her face in his hands. I love you, and I'm sorry for dragging you into this, for everything you've lost because of me. I haven't lost anything that mattered, Celine said. The firm was just a firm. The apartment was just walls. All of it can be rebuilt. But you... Her voice broke. You can't be rebuilt. So stop apologizing for surviving and just be here with me. He kissed her, soft, reverent, like she was something precious he'd almost lost and couldn't quite believe he still had. When they finally pulled apart, Mrs. Brennan cleared her throat. So what now? The housekeeper asked. Where do we go from here? Cassian looked at Celine. That's not my decision anymore. It's ours. Celine thought about the life she'd had before she signed his contract. The normal, predictable existence of an architect trying to build a career. The loneliness she'd barely acknowledged. The sense that she was moving through life without ever really living it. Then she thought about the woman she'd become in the months since. Harder, sharper. Someone who'd learned to fight not just for survival, but for the people she loved. Someone who'd walked into hell and dragged her husband out by sheer force of will. She didn't know if that woman was better or worse than who she'd been before. But she knew she wasn't going back. We disappear for a while, Celine said. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can heal without looking over our shoulders every 5 minutes. And then, she paused. Then we figure out who we are when we're not fighting for our lives. And if we don't like who we find, Celine smiled, then we'll deal with it together, like everything else. They left New York 3 days later. The estate was gone, burned to its foundation. The legitimate businesses Cassian had built were transferred to trustees who would manage them until he decided whether to return or sell them off entirely. Bank accounts were consolidated, assets liquidated, and everything converted into forms of wealth that could move across borders without leaving trails. Celine's architecture firm was harder to let go. She'd built it from nothing twice. Once before the betrayal that destroyed her. Once after Cassian had given her the resources to try again. But in the end, it was just a business. The work could be done anywhere, and the clients who really mattered would find her eventually, no matter where she went. Mrs. Brennan arranged everything. New identities, travel documents, a destination so remote that even Mateo's connections couldn't reach them. They left on a Tuesday morning, in a car with rental plates and enough cash to start over, driving south with no particular timeline and no one chasing them for the first time in months. Cassian sat in the passenger seat, watching the city disappear in the rearview mirror. His ribs were still taped. His face still bore the bruises from Mateo's interrogation, but he was healing, slowly, stubbornly. "Do you regret it?" Celine asked, keeping her eyes on the road. "Any of it? The violence? The empire? The choices I made that got people killed?" "All of it." Cassian was quiet for a long time. "I regret Claire. I regret that I wasn't smart enough or fast enough to protect her. I regret every person who died because I was too arrogant to see the consequences coming. But I don't regret meeting you. I don't regret the contract that brought you into my life. And I don't regret fighting to keep you when every rational part of me knew I should let you go." Celine reached across the console and took his hand. "Good, because I don't regret any of it either. Not the fear, not the violence, not the impossible choices. It's all part of how we got here. And here," she glanced at him, "here isn't so bad. We're running from a mob boss with nothing left to lose. Every law enforcement agency in the country probably has questions for us. And we're driving toward an uncertain future with no guarantee we'll survive the next year." "I know. Isn't it perfect?" Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the weight of their shared history, Cassian laughed. It was the best sound Celine had heard in weeks. They drove for 2 days, sleeping in anonymous motels and eating at diners where no one asked questions. Somewhere in Virginia, Cassian's burner phone rang. Mrs. Brennan's voice. "Matteo Sarconi was spotted boarding a flight to Bucharest. He's gone. The bounty's been officially canceled. You're clear." "Any indication he's planning to return?" "None. Every indication is he's staying gone. Interpol's watching him, but he's not their priority, and you're not worth the risk to him anymore." "Good. There's one more thing. Detective Chen, the one who questioned Mrs. Reeve, he was found dead this morning. Apparent suicide." Cassian's expression didn't change. "Matteo?" "Unclear. Could be the Sarconi family cleaning house. Could be Chen's other employers cutting loose ends. Could actually be suicide. He knew his career was over once the corruption charges dropped. Does it matter?" "No, I suppose it doesn't. One less problem for you to worry about. Take care of yourself, Mr. Reeve, and take care of her." The line went dead. Cassian set down the phone. Chen's dead. Celine processed this. Felt nothing. That should have disturbed her more than it did. A year ago, hearing that someone had died, even someone who'd threatened her, would have shaken her for days. Now, it was just information. "Are we bad people?" she asked quietly. "Probably. Does that bother you?" "Every day. But I've learned to live with it." "How?" Cassian looked at her, his expression soft despite the hardness in his eyes. "By remembering that good and bad aren't fixed points. They're choices we make every day. And as long as I keep choosing you, as long as I keep trying to be better than I was yesterday, I can live with the weight." That's not exactly reassuring. "No, but it's honest, and honesty's the best I can offer." Celine drove in silence for another mile. Then, "I'm going to hold you to that. The trying to be better part. I know. That's why I said it." Intact. They reached their destination on the third day, a small coastal town in South Carolina that existed primarily to serve retirees and tourists who wanted to escape the world for a while. The house Mrs. Brennan had arranged was simple. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen that opened onto a porch overlooking marshland. No neighbors for half a mile in either direction. The kind of place where people minded their own business and strangers were welcomed as long as they didn't cause trouble. It wasn't the estate. Wasn't Manhattan. Wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was theirs. They spent the first week doing nothing, sleeping late, walking the beach, eating meals on the porch while the sun set over water that stretched to the horizon. Cassian's body slowly knitted itself back together. Celine's nightmares came less frequently. They didn't talk about New York, didn't talk about Mateo or the Sarconis or the people who died. They just existed in the small space they'd carved out from the wreckage and learned how to breathe again. On the 8th day, Celine woke to find Cassian already up, sitting on the porch in his wheelchair, watching the dawn break over the marsh. She made coffee and brought 2 mugs outside, sat beside him without speaking. "I've been thinking," Cassian said finally. "About what?" "About the contract, the original one. 18 months, no love, absolute loyalty." Celine's chest tightened. "What about it?" "It expired 4 months ago, while we were running, while we were fighting. I never renewed it because—" He paused. "Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being a contract and became something real. But we never actually addressed that, never made it official." "What are you saying?" Cassian turned his wheelchair to face her, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Celine's breath caught. He opened it. Inside was a ring, not the expensive one from their fake wedding, something simpler. A single diamond set in platinum, elegant without being ostentatious. "I'm saying," Cassian continued, his voice rough with emotion, "that I want to ask you properly this time. Not because I need a wife for appearances, not because I'm buying your loyalty, but because I love you. Because you're the only person who's ever seen the worst parts of me and chosen to stay anyway." He took her hand. "Celine Vale, will you marry me? For real this time. No contract, no expiration date. Just you and me and whatever life we can build from here." Celine was crying. When had she started crying? "Yes," she said. "Yes, you idiot. Of course, yes." Cassian slipped the ring onto her finger, her left hand this time, where it belonged. It fit perfectly. They sat there on the porch as the sun rose, holding hands, watching the world wake up around them. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Celine felt something that wasn't fear or rage or desperate determination. She felt peace. They got married 6 weeks later. Not in a garden surrounded by lawyers and photographers. In a small courthouse in Charleston with Mrs. Brennan as their witness, and a judge who didn't ask questions about why the groom was in a wheelchair or why the bride had scars on her hands that looked like they'd come from something more violent than architecture. Celine wore a simple white dress. Cassian wore a dark suit. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Promises about honesty and survival and choosing each other every day even when it was hard. When the judge pronounced them married, when Cassian kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning, Celine felt the weight of everything they'd survived settle into something bearable. The original contract had been about salvation, about 2 desperate people making a deal to survive. This marriage was about choice, about 2 people who'd walked through fire and decided the view from the other side was worth the burns. After the ceremony, they had lunch at a restaurant overlooking the harbor. Mrs. Brennan toasted them with champagne and allowed herself a rare smile. "To survival," she said, "and to whatever comes next." "To whatever comes next," Cassian echoed, raising his glass. Celine looked at him, this complicated, damaged, brilliant man who'd offered her a lifeline when she was drowning and then somehow convinced her to pull him back to shore. She thought about the architect she'd been before she met him, the woman who'd believed the world operated on fairness and hard work. That woman was gone, burned away in the fires of the last year. What remained was someone harder, someone who understood that survival required sacrifice, and that love required courage, and that sometimes the only way forward was through the darkness. She raised her glass. "To whatever comes next." They drank. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the harbor and the ocean and the horizon, the world kept turning without them. Epilogue. 2 years later, Celine stood in the study of their new home, not the South Carolina beach house, which they'd left after 6 months, but a renovated farmhouse in Vermont where winters were brutal and summers were brief and no one cared about their past as long as they kept to themselves. The study had good light, south-facing windows, drafting tables positioned to catch the morning sun. Blueprints covered every surface, designs for houses, community centers, schools, work that mattered, work that built instead of destroyed. Celine's firm had reopened quietly, operating remotely with a small team of designers scattered across 3 states. The clients who found them were the ones who needed architects willing to work in difficult places with impossible budgets. Reservation schools, disaster relief housing, projects that would never win awards but would shelter people who needed shelter. It was the best work she'd ever done. Behind her, the door opened. Cassian wheeled himself in, moving with practiced ease despite the chronic pain that would never fully leave him. "Working late again?" he asked. Says the man who was on a conference call until midnight. Cassian's legitimate businesses had survived the transition surprisingly intact. Turned out that once you removed the criminal elements, there was still a profitable empire built on hospitals and shipping and real estate. He delegated most of the day-to-day operations, but he still stayed involved enough to ensure things ran smoothly. Mostly, though, he focused on smaller projects, funding scholarships for kids from neighborhoods like the one he'd grown up in, supporting programs for people rebuilding their lives after violence. Quiet work, invisible work, the kind that wouldn't erase what he'd done but might balance the scales slightly. He moved beside her desk, looking at her current project, plans for a women's shelter in Maine. "This is beautiful," he said. "It's practical. Beauty's secondary." "Beauty's never secondary with you, even when you think it is." Celine smiled despite herself. Flatterer. Truth-teller. She set down her pencil, turned to face him. "Do you ever miss it? The power. The empire. Being feared instead of forgotten." Cassian considered this. "Sometimes. Usually around 3 in the morning when the pain's bad and I can't sleep, and I remember what it felt like to have people jump when I spoke. But then morning comes and I look at what we're building instead, and I remember why I left." "Why did you leave?" "Really? Was it just me, or was it something else?" "It was exhaustion," Cassian said quietly. "I'd been running on rage and grief for so long, I'd forgotten what anything else felt like. Then you walked into my study and you reminded me. You showed me that there were other ways to be strong, other things worth fighting for. And slowly, that became more appealing than revenge." He reached for her hand. "You saved me, Celine. Not just my life, my soul, such as it is. You saved me too. From bankruptcy. From prison. From a life spent wondering what I could have been if I'd just been brave enough to try. So we're even." "No, we're better than even. We're—" The words stuck in her throat. Happy felt too simple. Content felt too passive. "We're alive," she finished, "and choosing each other. That's enough." Outside, snow was starting to fall. The first of the season. It dusted the fields beyond their windows, turning everything clean and white, covering the scars in the earth the way time covered the scars in their history. They sat together in the study as the world disappeared behind curtains of snow, and Celine thought about contracts and choices and the strange paths that led people to the lives they were meant to live. She'd signed Cassian's contract believing she was selling her future. Instead, she'd found it. And somewhere in the years between that desperate signature and this quiet moment, she'd learned that salvation wasn't something you could buy or negotiate or trade for. It was something you built, one choice at a time, one day at a time, with the right person beside you. "I love you," she said. Cassian squeezed her hand. "I love you too." The snow kept falling, and in a small farmhouse in Vermont, 2 people who'd survived impossible odds settled into the peaceful, ordinary life they'd earned by refusing to give up on each other. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect.